Hello everyone, you're watching the channel Stories of Our Life. Friends, make yourselves comfortable. I wish you to truly enjoy listening to this life story.
It must be admitted that the room smelled pleasant when they entered, struggling to open the old creaky door. They found themselves in a dimly lit hallway. Peggy immediately thought that it should probably smell musty and moldy here, but no, there was a subtle scent in the air, either vanilla or cinnamon. Once their eyes adjusted to the semi-darkness, the girls saw an old metal coat rack to their right and a couch covered in black, cracked artificial leather a little further ahead. Exchanging glances, they began taking off their jackets. "Good day," a pleasant female voice came from somewhere deep in the corridor. "Please undress and have a seat. I will call you shortly." Certainly, visiting a fortune teller was Donna's idea. And it wasn't because she was interested in magic or believed in supernatural forces. At least Peggy hadn't noticed such hobbies in her friend before. At the age of 17, Donna had developed her own philosophy and shared one of its postulates with Peggy. "One must live brightly and joyfully," her friend once said as they sat on the floor next to Peggy's bed. "That's the whole point. If every day is like the previous one, you might as well die of boredom. The days should be distinct from one another." Donna made an effort to try as many new things as possible. Since high school students had limited money and opportunities, Donna subscribed to numerous websites that provided information about free events, promotions, and other entertainments. It was there that she found an invitation to visit the session of Bella, a hereditary gypsy fortune teller, offering a 2-for-1 steal. The price was acceptable for schoolgirls if they made an appointment on weekdays before 5 p.m. Donna persuaded Peggy to skip the last 2 classes and go to the mysterious Bella. "Donna, you know perfectly well that I don't believe in such nonsense," Peggy said as they approached the designated house. Her friend shrugged. "I don't either. But it'll be fun, and you can tell everyone that you went to a real gypsy fortune teller." And so, they found themselves in that dimly lit corridor. Bella didn't keep them waiting for long. Within a couple of minutes, her deep, pleasant voice resonated from behind the dense dark blue curtains that divided the corridors and the room. "Come in." The girls exchanged glances. Donna smiled encouragingly and stepped behind the curtain first. Peggy sighed and followed her friend. "Have a seat." The voice belonged to a young woman who appeared to be around 30 years old. She was tall, slender, with slightly tanned skin and brown eyes. However, according to the girls' expectations, she didn't quite resemble a gypsy. Her shiny black shoulder-length hair was styled in a trendy asymmetrical bob, her nails had a solid light manicure, and her face had natural, almost unnoticeable makeup. She was sitting behind a round table, covered with a red velvet tablecloth, so the lower half of her body was not visible. But she wore a strict pale pink blouse on top. "This isn't Gypsy Bella," Peggy thought, "she's just a businesswoman, probably the owner of a fitness center or a clothing store." Judging by the raised eyebrows, Donna didn't expect to see someone like her either. The girls sat down on the hard wooden chairs. "So, who wants to go first?" the fortune teller smiled. "Let me," Donna replied. "How would you like to start? Do you have a specific question that troubles your heart and soul, or would you simply like me to tell you about your present and future?" Her friend shrugged. "Just tell me about myself." Bella nodded and leisurely shuffled the deck of cards with her long, graceful fingers, devoid of any jewelry, which, once again, didn't fit the image of a real gypsy according to Peggy's expectations. "All right," the fortune teller said, laying out a few cards. "I see that you're an unusual girl, seeking to live an interesting life, and in search of adventures." She paused, shifted her gaze to Donna, smirked cunningly, and then focused her attention back on the cards. "And you will find them, though not as quickly as you'd like. But trust me, the wait will be worth it." Peggy was surprised to see her friend looking intrigued. Donna's cheeks had slightly flushed, she leaned forward, and her gaze remained fixed on the fortune teller's face. "What else do you see?" Donna asked. The fortune teller laid out a few more cards. "You're going through a difficult period right now, problems with your parents. I know it's tough for you at the moment, and this period will last for a while, but it will all resolve itself well, although not in the best way. In due time, you will find a new friend who will always be there for you. And the friend you have now will also help you in the future. Despite the challenges you'll face along your journey, with the support of people who love you, you will be able to overcome everything. That's all for now. She gathered all the cards and shuffled them, then leaned back in her chair and closed her eyes as if she were very tired. Thank you, Donna said. Not wanting Bella to sit with her eyes closed for a few seconds, she added cautiously, my friend would also like to hear your prediction. We signed up for the 2 clients for the price of 1 offer. Upon hearing this, Bella smiled, opened her eyes, and looked attentively at Peggy. Peggy felt a shiver run down her spine, even though the fortune teller's gaze seemed friendly enough. The woman shuffled the cards again and laid them out on the table. The sight she beheld seemed to surprise her. Her black eyebrows arched and lifted. She furrowed her brows slightly. Fascinating, she murmured, if your friend has adventures yet to come, you've already had quite a lot of interesting experiences in your life. I see you as a little girl, surrounded by different people. They pass you from one hand to another, and you, like a relay baton, transition from one person to another. Yes, that's probably why you're more shy and timid than your friend. However, you possess inner strength that can't be underestimated, and when the time comes, you will show yourself in a better light. Wow! Donna unexpectedly exclaimed loudly, and upon seeing the gazes directed at her from Peggy and Bella, she quickly added, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. The fortune teller nodded, looked at the cards again, and pulled out a few more. Well, she said, there certainly is something surprising here. Now it's clear why you've been moving around. I see you as a very young girl, just a baby. You're in a wealthy house. There's a wide staircase covered with a bright green carpet, like grass. A beautiful dark-haired woman is holding you in her arms. And then I see night. The woman is sleeping on a big bed, and the little girl is next to her in a crib. And then unfamiliar hands take the girl out of the crib and carry her away. That's all. She abruptly leaned back, closed her eyes, and pressed her fingers to her temples as if she had suddenly developed a headache. Wait, Donna said, who is the woman, the girl? Who abducted her? Leave, the fortune teller said in a hoarse voice, still keeping her eyes closed. Your time is up. I've told you everything I saw. The friends exchanged glances and, without saying a word, stood up and left the room. In the corridor, they quickly got dressed and exited the premises. Outside, the bright sun was shining, reflecting off the pristine white snow. The dark room, mysterious Bella with her cards, and her enigmatic predictions turned out to be not as gloomy and frightening as they seemed when the girls were inside. So, did you have fun? Donna asked. I told you there would be something to remember. Peggy nodded. You know, at first, everything seemed so believable to me. She's so unusual, the way she looks you in the eyes, it even gave me goosebumps. Yeah, it's commonly believed that all fortune tellers, especially gypsies, are good psychologists, Donna said. Peggy pondered for a moment. Most likely, that's true. If you think about it, she didn't say anything that could be caught as a lie, Peggy said. She didn't. But it got awkward for me. According to her words, it turns out I was abducted from my mother as a child, a mother living in a wealthy house. Donna snorted. Sounds like some kind of detective story. Tell me about it. But you know, if she turns out to be right and you really end up making a new friend instead of me, I won't forgive you, Peggy said, laughing. Peggy, you know you're my best friend forever. The memories of their visit to the fortune teller faded away after about a week. At first, thoughts crossed Peggy's mind, what if there's some truth in Bella's words? Nah. It's just self-deception, she thought, looking at her tired mother, who quickly finished her soup to go to sleep after her shift. Maybe I just wish I really came from a wealthy family. That's why I hold on to such fantasies. Peggy's mother, Evelyn, had worked as a janitor since Peggy was born. Once, she mentioned that she had graduated from college, but she never talked about her major or why she didn't pursue a career in that field, and Peggy never asked. She had seen their life as it was since childhood and couldn't imagine anything different. Her mother would wake up early when it was still dark outside, sweep the yard, and come back in time to wake up Peggy for school. They would have breakfast together, usually with semolina porridge and buttered sandwiches, and then Peggy would go to school while her mother went back to work. After school, the girl would heat up a simple dinner herself and then do her homework. Evelyn would return in the evening, eat something, read, and they would go to sleep. "Mom, what are you reading?" Peggy asked. Her mother would smile and mention unfamiliar surnames and names that sounded unclear but very beautiful to Peggy. As she grew older, the girl realized they were authors of French novels from the 19th and early 20th centuries. "Shall we go for a walk in the park on the weekend?" her mother suggested. Peggy nodded. They never had extra money to spend on entertainment, so walks were the only affordable option. However, walks with her mother were never boring. Evelyn knew all the interesting places in the city. She would take her daughter to new playgrounds, and together they would watch ducks in the park and feed them. Once, they even climbed onto the rooftop of a high-rise building to watch the sunset. As Peggy grew older, she often pondered that she didn't truly understand who her mother was. It was evident that Evelyn loved her daughter and took care of her as best she could. She didn't seem foolish or indifferent, but it seemed like she lacked ambition for something more. They lived in a small, old-service apartment, and they had enough money only for the simplest food and clothing. Evelyn borrowed books from the library. However, when there were school trips or excursions, she always managed to provide money for them. "Mom, where is my dad?" Peggy asked one day when she was about 6 years old. "I don't know, sunshine. The last time I saw him was when you were just a few months old. And I doubt we'll ever see him again," her mother replied. They didn't have any relatives either. At least, her mom never told her about them. Her mother had no friends or suitors, only her daughter, work, and French novels. And Peggy grew accustomed to living in their little world, where they were always just the two of them. When she started school, other people began to enter her life: Donna, who became her best friend, classmates, beloved teachers. "I'm happy for you," her mother would say, sadly smiling. "We lived like recluses. I was afraid you wouldn't learn to interact with people and would end up like me. But look at how many friends you have." When Peggy turned 14, she found her first job with Donna's help. They had just finished their studies, and they had some free time. Basically, it's simple. We have to go out in the morning, wash buses before their routes. It will be good for the summer. And during the day, we can put up advertisements or hand out flyers. "What are flyers?" Peggy asked. "Oh, those," her friend said, "they're colorful leaflets, or advertisements, to put it differently." "Ah, that's what they're called." "Well, it doesn't matter anyway, people just throw them in the trash after a few meters." Her friend shrugged. "But why should we care? Our task is to distribute them. Or don't you need the money?" Money was needed. At the end of August, Peggy and Donna went to the flea market together. They begged the vendors for discounts on clothes they liked. They even had some money left, and Peggy tried to give it to her mother. "Keep this money for yourself, sunshine," her mother said with a smile. "I have everything I need. But you're growing up, and you'll always want something new. And if the opportunity arises, don't turn it down." At first, Peggy wanted to tell her mother about their visit to the fortune teller with Donna, but several reasons held her back. Firstly, it would mean confessing that they skipped classes. Secondly, what if Evelyn got offended that her daughter believed in such things? And thirdly, and most importantly, Peggy was afraid that her mother would admit it as the truth. After agonizing for a few days, she decided to forget about it. "It's all nonsense," she thought, looking at the mirror next to a family photograph where Evelyn held her daughter's hand, both of them walking to the first grade. "Mom and I look alike. We both have brown eyes and chestnut hair. Well, hers is a bit lighter than mine, and we have the same noses with a small bump. Although Mom has thin lips and mine are plump. That's probably from Dad. Soothing herself with such thoughts, Peggy resolved never to think about the day she and Donna visited the strange fortune teller again. After finishing school, Peggy didn't apply anywhere and went straight to look for a job. This happened for several reasons. Firstly, in the spring, her mother fell seriously ill. She had heart problems. She spent a long time in the hospital, and after being discharged, the doctors said she needed to take expensive medication regularly. Besides, her mother couldn't work as a janitor either. Every day after school, Peggy went straight to a fast food network cafe. They hired 16-year-olds there. And the pay was decent too. She finished at 9 p.m. and, without feeling her back and arms, walked home. There she had dinner with her mother, helped her take a bath, and tucked her into bed. Secondly, because of work and the need to take care of her mother, she had absolutely no time for studying. While her classmates had tutors and prepared for exams, Peggy took extra shifts. She passed her exams with the minimum passing score, only taking the mandatory subjects. "Well, if you don't attend the graduation ceremony, I won't forgive you," Donna exclaimed when Peggy told her that she would go home after the awards ceremony. Peggy sighed. "Donna, I'm not going to spend money on a dress and shoes that I'll wear only once in my life." "If that's the case, I'll arrange everything," her friend replied. "I recently found a pavilion at the market with reasonable prices and decent dresses. We'll buy everything there, and graduation happens only once in a lifetime." "All right, you convinced me." The dresses were indeed inexpensive. Donna, with her blonde hair, chose a pale pink A-line dress and silver sandals. Peggy opted for an emerald green knee-length straight dress and practical black pumps. "Looks great," her friend said when they were already dressed, wearing makeup and curling each other's hair with an old curling iron. Peggy said, "Yeah, I thought it would be worse." Donna laughed. "Well, I'm glad we exceeded your expectations. Let's go." After the awards ceremony, they were given time to take the traditional class photo and pose with their parents and friends. Peggy took a picture with her mother, Donna with her parents and younger brothers, and then the two friends took a photo together. "My dear, I'm so proud of you," Evelyn said. "It would be something to be proud of," Peggy smiled. "I know you're a smart girl, and I see how much you work and take care of me, even though it should be the other way around. I hope there will come a day when you'll meet someone who can protect you, unlike me." "Mom, stop it," Peggy embraced her and felt tears streaming down her cheeks. "That's the last thing we need. The mascara will smudge now." "You've always taken care of me so well, Mom," she said. "And you've raised me very well." "Yeah." Evelyn stepped back and looked directly into her daughter's eyes. "You're a wonderful girl, and you being in my life is the best thing that has happened to me. I hope someday you can forgive me for not being able to give you everything you deserve." "Mom, don't make things up. You're the best to me." Peggy wiped away her tears, hugged her tightly once again, and kissed her mother. Her mother smiled, held her hand in her warm, slightly damp palms, looked at her daughter strangely, and said, "Most importantly, remember, if you set a goal for yourself, never give up and don't be afraid of anything. That's the most powerful trait of your kind." Peggy was surprised by this strange statement and decided that tomorrow she would definitely ask her mother about their family. Well, she hadn't seen her father in a long time. Peggy was not a little girl and understood that such situations happen. But her mother should have parents, uncles, aunts, and other relatives. And if she stopped talking to them, what could be the reason? "Evelyn, do you need a ride?" Donna's father's voice sounded. After the official part and a small feast, most of the parents were heading home, while the graduates, some teachers, and mostly young people were going to a specially arranged restaurant. "Yes, I'm coming," Evelyn replied. She looked at her daughter, smiled, wiped away a tear in the corner of her eye, and said, "Have a good time, girls," looking at Peggy and Donna. The girls waved goodbye to their departing parents. "Let's go, shall we take a last walk through the school?" Donna suggested. "Remember the elements." "Sure." They started by entering the cafeteria. The chairs were lifted and turned upside down, the floors were mopped, and the serving window was closed. The only thing I liked here in terms of food was the pilaf, Donna said. And their cocoa turned out pretty good.
Yeah.
When it didn't burn, the friends laughed and continued on their way. Do you think we'll see each other less now? Donna sighed. Most likely. They're sending me to my grandmother's for the summer with my brothers. I'll only be back in mid-August. Wow.
Yeah.
Not the best news. My dad just told me today. And then there's college applications, studying, and everything else. Have you changed your mind about getting a job? Peggy shook her head. No, my mom needs medication right now, and she can't work. I'm the only one who can support us. I hope she'll get better over the year. Then I'll submit my documents. The exam results will still be valid. Well, things sure are tough. Okay, let's not be sad, let's keep going. The friends peeked into the gym and found a few frightened boys from the parallel class hiding beer bottles. Girls, are you okay? You can't scare people like that, Vovka exclaimed indignantly, his shirt soaked from the surprise. What are you afraid of? Donna teased him. Do you think they'll kick you out of school? All the boys burst into laughter. The girls continued on their way. They sat on the windowsills of the second floor, where they usually discussed school gossip and hastily jumped down whenever a teacher passed by. Then they peeked into their classroom, where Donna's bulletin board from last year was still hanging on the wall.
Yeah.
Donna said, I would have done a better job now and arranged the text blocks differently. It would have looked much neater. Peggy laughed. No wonder you want to study something related to advertising. You would be good at it.
Yeah.
Thanks to my mom's friend who works at an advertising agency and lets me visit occasionally. She taught me a few things. I'm sure you'll succeed. I would like that. By the way, what about you? I wanted to know if you'll be changing jobs or staying at the same place. Well, I've been looking at job postings. Ideally, I'd like to work as a waitress in some fancy restaurant. The tips should be good there. And maybe I could become a manager if they promote me. Or you could try being a housekeeper, Donna suggested. You could work in a small cozy family hotel. They usually have shifts where you work for a couple of days and then have time off. That way, you can also spend time with your mom. Why not? Peggy said. It's a good idea. My mom can take care of herself now. She can manage a day without me. And they probably pay more there too. When the farewell ceremony at school was over, the friends went downstairs and joined their classmates to go to a restaurant. At that moment, Peggy thought it's a good thing she gave in to her friend's persuasion and attended the graduation. The restaurant was lively and noisy. The host conducted contests, and teachers and students took turns making toasts and wishing each other the best. A girl from the parallel class whom Peggy and Donna couldn't stand because of her unpleasant character suddenly caught them coming out of the restroom. She hugged both of them tightly, crying drunkenly, and confessed that she would miss them. Well, Donna said when they handed the crying graduate over to her classmates. She always hated us. Remember in 9th grade when she spread rumors that we vandalized the school restroom walls? Donna. Peggy said. But we did paint on them. But she didn't see us, her friend pointed out. So she must have started the rumors, Peggy laughed. She had only had a couple of glasses of champagne, but for some reason, everyone around her, including Donna, seemed exceptionally beautiful, happy, and vibrant. Her body felt unusually light, and it seemed like this festive state would never end. They danced, sang, made toasts, ran outside to breathe in the cool summer air, and the party didn't end until dawn.
Yeah.
Mom, we're heading home, Donna said on the phone, as her mother had sent a text asking them to let her know when she and Peggy would be coming home. What?
Yeah.
Got it. She turned to her friend and saw an unfamiliar worry in Peggy's eyes, which made her heart tighten. Mom is asking if you can come with me to our place, Donna said. Why? Peggy asked. I don't know. She said it's something important. Did something happen to your mom? Peggy shrugged. With trembling hands, Peggy dialed her mother's number. Short beeps echoed from the receiver. She's not answering. Something must have happened, Peggy said. Maybe everything is fine, Donna replied in a falsely cheerful voice. But then why does your mom want me to come with you? Donna had no answer to that question. In a somber silence, they waited for a taxi and went to Donna's house. Donna's mother greeted them at the doorstep. How was your outing, girls? She asked. Fine, Donna replied. What happened? Donna's mother glanced guiltily at Peggy. What happened to your mom? Peggy asked, feeling a lump forming in her throat. She's in the hospital, Donna replied. Tears streamed down Peggy's cheeks for the second time that evening. Sweetie, please don't cry. Our dad is with her there. He'll be arriving soon and will tell us what the doctors are saying, Donna reassured her. What happened to her? Peggy asked. Donna's mother led the girls to the kitchen and poured water for Peggy. When they all sat around the table, she began. At first, everything was fine. We took her to your house, joked around, laughed. When we were almost there, she clutched her chest and said she felt a stabbing pain in her heart. We accompanied her to the apartment. Evelyn said it had been happening to her quite often lately, and she just needed to take a pill, and everything would be fine in half an hour. She took the pill, put the kettle on for us, and we sat down, waiting. Half an hour later, she said, I'm fine, and wanted us to leave and go home. But we noticed she was all pale, with cold sweat on her forehead. I took her hand, and her pulse was racing. We wanted to call an ambulance, but she adamantly refused. After another half an hour, we somehow convinced her, and we drove her to the hospital ourselves. They quickly examined her in the emergency room, took an ECG, and said they suspect it's a heart attack. At that moment, Donna gasped loudly, and Peggy flinched. Donna's mother continued, Well, I went back home because the boys needed to be put to bed. And our dad stayed there. Why didn't you call us? Peggy asked. Donna's mother sighed. Evelyn made us promise not to tell you anything until you informed us that you were heading home. She said it wouldn't help you in any way, but it would ruin your only celebration. Peggy lowered her head onto her folded hands on the table and began to cry. Donna hugged her. You're my good girl, Donna's mother gently stroked Peggy's head. I believe everything will be fine. An hour later, Donna's dad arrived. He looked tired and said that Evelyn was in the intensive care unit, but the doctors said her condition was stable. He left his phone number with the doctors, who promised to call, but they warned that it would be after lunch. Well, girls, we all need to go to bed, Donna's father said. Peggy, will you sleep with Donna tonight? Peggy nodded. As they settled in with their friend, the sun had already risen. It's okay, Donna said. I'm sure everything will be fine. They woke up around noon, opening their eyes. Peggy was momentarily surprised to find herself sleeping somewhere other than her own home. She turned to the other side and looked at her sleeping friend. Then she remembered the events of the previous day, getting dressed up and curling their hair with Donna, the graduation ceremony, her mom hugging her and saying that Peggy was strong and could handle anything, the walk around the school, the restaurant. Her mom. The thought hit her so abruptly that she sat up in bed, waking Donna. What's wrong? Donna asked sleepily. It's my mom. We need to find out what's going on, Peggy said, throwing on Donna's robe that happened to be nearby and leaving the room. Donna's mother was preparing something in the kitchen. Good morning, Peggy said, or rather, good afternoon. Hello, sunshine, Donna's mother replied. Get freshened up, wash up, and come have breakfast. Oh, is there still no news about my mom? No calls yet. Our father took the boys out for a walk, they'll be back soon. Maybe someone called him. Shortly after they finished breakfast, Donna's dad returned with her younger brothers. Seeing the three pairs of eyes fixed on him, filled with anticipation, the head of the family said, "No one called me," he said. They all sat down together to watch TV. There was a series playing, but Peggy couldn't manage to follow the plot. After half an hour, she said, "I think I'll go home or go to the hospital. What if they don't call today?" At that moment, the phone rang. "Hello," Donna's father said, hearing something on the other end. He got up and went to the kitchen, closing the door behind him. "What's going on?" Donna anxiously asked her mother. Donna's mother also went to the kitchen following her husband. Donna looked at her pale friend and took her hand. A few minutes later, Donna's parents returned. From their expressions, Peggy understood everything. She doesn't remember those days well. Thank goodness Donna was there the whole time. And of course, thanks to her parents. They took care of all the arrangements for the funeral. For another week after that, Peggy lived at her friend's place, hardly leaving the bed, until she realized she couldn't burden them anymore. Besides, they had a flight to her grandmother's tomorrow. "Do you want me to stay?" Donna asked. Peggy shook her head. "I'll manage. I need to go back to work, I'm running out of money. And I can't stay at your place indefinitely either. Don't worry, I'm strong. I'll call and write to you every day, and if anything happens, just let me know, and I'll come back right away." "That's not necessary. I'll be fine." After packing her things, Peggy thanked Donna's parents, without whom she wouldn't have been able to cope with everything that had fallen on her after her mother's death. "The kids will stay with Grandma until mid-August," Donna's mom said, "and we'll be back in 2 weeks. So, if you ever need help, you can always reach out to us." Peggy nodded. "And if you need any assistance with money or anything else, don't hesitate to ask," Donna's father added. "You can always turn to us. After all, you're almost like family to us. You and Donna practically grew up together." "Thank you for everything," Peggy said, trying to force a smile. "I wouldn't have made it through without you." Their apartment was cold and empty when Peggy and her mother entered. The tables and windowsills were covered in a layer of dust. The flowers had withered. On the table, there were mugs with moldy tea that had been left since the day Evelyn was taken to the hospital. Only once after that did Peggy and Donna come here to gather their belongings. Seeing a worn-out book with a soft cover on the armchair, Peggy picked it up and read the title. About halfway through the book, there was a bookmark, a small old postcard signed with crooked childish letters. "Dear Mommy, Happy International Women's Day. I wish you happiness, love, and that you live for 100 more years. Your daughter, Peggy." "My wish didn't come true, Mommy," Peggy whispered, holding the bookmark in her hands. The thought that her mother would never finish reading this book, never sit in this armchair again, and that Peggy would never hear her quiet, calm voice or see her attentive, kind eyes made her burst into tears. Perhaps she would have continued lying in bed at home if the doorbell hadn't rung the next day. Peggy wanted to ignore it, but the person ringing clearly didn't want to leave. She had to get up, put on a robe that still smelled like her mother's perfume. "Who's there?" she grumbled, opening the door. Standing on the threshold was a short, bald man who looked at Peggy with an expression of disapproval and disdain. "Are you Peggy?" he asked. "Yes, it's me. Late Mrs. Evelyn was your mother, correct?" Peggy nodded. A lump formed in her throat again, but she didn't want to cry in front of this unfamiliar and unpleasant man. "And who are you?" "I'm from the management company. You know that this is a company-owned apartment that was assigned to your mother while she was employed?" "Yes, I know," Peggy replied. The man nodded. "Since your mother is no longer employed with us due to her passing, we kindly ask you to vacate this apartment as soon as possible." "What?" The meaning of his words didn't immediately register with Peggy. "You're evicting me? You need to vacate the company-owned housing by the end of the week." "But I have nowhere to go. We didn't have any other apartment." "Go live with relatives. My mom didn't have any relatives. Find another apartment for yourself, young lady, the bald man said, as if getting angrier. Where you'll live is not my problem. If you're still here on Monday, I'll come back with the police, and we'll have a different kind of conversation. He turned around and left. Peggy closed the door. She felt tears welling up in her eyes. No, it wasn't the time to cry. She would figure something out. She needed to find an apartment, but first, she had to calculate how much money she had left. It turned out she had very little money. Most of it had gone towards the funeral. Moreover, she hadn't been working in the past few weeks. Looking through advertisements, Peggy realized that she didn't even have enough money to pay for the first month's rent. She needed to find a job. When Peggy arrived at the cafe, she saw an unfamiliar girl behind the counter. "Hello," she said. "Is the manager here? I was on vacation, and now I'm returning to work. I need to speak with her. Let her know it's Peggy." The girl nodded and went towards the kitchen. The manager came out a minute later, looking surprised to see Peggy. "What are you doing here?" she asked. "Hi, I know my shift is only tomorrow, but I wanted to talk to you right now. The thing is, I need money, could you lend me some?" "Wait a minute," the manager interrupted. "What shift, Peggy? You haven't been working here for a week. You didn't show up for work. I fired you. We hired someone new to replace you." "Wait, how? How did you fire me?" The manager shrugged. "Well, you didn't show up for work, did you? I told you my mother passed away and asked for a week off." The manager seemed slightly flustered but raised her voice for emphasis. "Peggy, you've lost your mind and lost track of reality. What texts are you talking about? In such cases, you're supposed to submit a written request, and for the death of a close relative, you're given 3 days of leave. It seems like you've been absent without permission. That's it. I offer my condolences regarding your mother. Take care. But I can't help you with anything." "What about the money? Am I entitled to any severance pay?" "What payout?" "You received payment for your hours worked on your last day. That's it." "Sorry, they just delivered meat, I have to go." The manager left, leaving Peggy feeling completely alone. The new girl behind the counter looked sympathetically at her, but as soon as Peggy caught her gaze, she quickly looked away. Great, Peggy thought, my mother died, I'm being evicted from the apartment, and now I've lost my job too. Peggy walked home, contemplating what to do. She could, of course, call Donna and ask for money from her parents, but they would be away for another 2 weeks, and Peggy needed to move out the day after tomorrow. Besides, she didn't want to borrow money from them after everything they had already done for her. She had to become an adult and solve her own problems. She would manage it. Her mother believed in her and considered her strong. Neither on that day nor the next could Peggy come up with a plan. The only thing she did was pack her belongings. She found a large, old suitcase. Although the leather was worn, it looked sturdy enough. Throughout their lives, she and her mother had never traveled anywhere. It was interesting when and why Evelyn had bought it. In general, as Peggy reflected, she realized how little she knew about her own mother and her life before Peggy's birth. Since I have nowhere to live, I'll have to leave almost all of our belongings here, she reasoned. I'll take a few things as keepsakes, maybe a family album, for example. Maybe I can find out something about our relatives in the process. But the albums Peggy found only had photographs of her mother, and they were taken after Peggy was born. She didn't find any relatives, friends, or childhood photos of her mother, as if her mother came into existence simultaneously with Peggy. Additionally, Peggy couldn't find some of her own documents, such as her birth certificate. They had submitted it when applying for a passport, or was it not required? Who were you, Mom? Peggy asked aloud, taking out a photo from the album where they stood on the school porch. Evelyn was smiling and affectionately hugging her daughter. Peggy stood there, serious, tightly holding a large bouquet of gladioli. You should have told me everything earlier. Even if you had a falling out with your family, I would have known that I'm not alone right now. While going through her mother's things, Peggy finally found an old photo that was definitely taken before her birth. It showed a young Evelyn sitting on the grass in a light summer uniform dress, smiling happily. There was a bush with unusual, beautiful blue flowers slightly behind her in the frame. The back of the photo had a caption. There were some initials written. Maybe it was a gift from Dad to Mom. That seems logical. Although, then you should have been married, but you never mentioned it, and I received school benefits as a single mother's child. Did you get divorced shortly after my birth? Well, that's more likely. Surprisingly, this little discovery and the unique conversation with her mother brought some relief to Peggy. She had learned something new, at least. Packing her belongings in the suitcase, she permanently left the apartment where she had lived her whole life. Peggy had no plan, she simply walked the streets, dragging her suitcase behind her. Her only goal was to leave the neighborhood behind. She wanted to distance herself from the church where she had grown up. After about an hour or two, she grew tired. Fortunately, she came across a large park and settled on a bench. It was warm, a summer night. She could spend the night here and try to find a job tomorrow that would come with accommodation. Peggy, what are you doing? The girl heard a loud female voice nearby. Startled, Peggy looked around in horror, thinking it might be one of her teachers. However, it turned out to be just an unfamiliar woman addressing her young daughter. The girl, about 5 years old, was sitting on the path and attempting to eat a stone. As it got darker, there were fewer people in the park. After sunset, it became chilly, and Peggy put on her jacket. The few remaining visitors hurrying towards the exit gave her perplexed looks, making her blush. Eventually, it grew dark, and there was almost no one left in the park except for a couple strolling at the end of the alley. Peggy settled on the bench and tried to fall asleep. It didn't happen immediately, and she slept poorly, flinching at every nocturnal noise. Moreover, lying on the hard, narrow bench wasn't particularly comfortable. However, exhaustion took its toll, and she fell into a deep sleep towards dawn. Miss, are you okay?" Someone gently shook her shoulder. Peggy opened her eyes and saw an elderly man standing over her, looking concerned. "Well, thank God," he said with relief when he saw that Peggy had opened her eyes. He sighed and sat down on the nearby bench. Strangely enough, this little discovery and the peculiar conversation with her mother brought some relief to Peggy. She had learned something new, at least. After packing her things in the suitcase, she permanently left the apartment where she had lived her whole life on a Sunday evening. Peggy didn't have a plan, she simply walked the streets, dragging her suitcase behind her. Her only goal was to leave the neighborhood. She wanted to distance herself from the church she had grown up in. After about an hour or two, she grew tired. Fortunately, she came across a large park along the way, and Peggy settled on a bench. It was warm, summer weather. In principle, she could spend the night there and try to find some work tomorrow that included accommodation. "Peggy, what are you doing?" The girl heard a loud female voice nearby. Startled, Peggy looked around in horror, thinking it might be someone from her teachers. However, it turned out to be just an unfamiliar woman addressing her young daughter. The girl, about 5 years old, was sitting on the path and attempting to eat a stone. As it grew darker, there were fewer people in the park. After sunset, it became cool, and Peggy put on her jacket. The few visitors hurrying towards the exit cast puzzled glances at her, making her blush. Finally, it became fully dark, and there was almost no one left in the park except for a couple strolling at the end of the alley. Peggy settled on the bench and tried to fall asleep. It didn't happen immediately, and she slept poorly, flinching at every nocturnal noise. Plus, lying on the hard, narrow bench wasn't particularly comfortable. However, fatigue took its toll, and she sank into a deep sleep by morning. Miss, are you okay?" Someone gently shook her shoulder. Peggy opened her eyes and saw an elderly man standing over her, looking concerned. "Well, thank God," he said with relief when he saw that Peggy had opened her eyes. He sighed and sat down on the nearby bench. Peggy also sat up and looked around. It was early morning, already quite bright, but the sun hadn't risen yet. However, there were already people in the park, a couple of joggers, sleepy dog walkers, an energetic senior woman using Nordic walking poles, a woman pushing a stroller. Peggy observed the man who had woken her up. He was of average height, with gray hair, neatly trimmed mustache and beard, and blue eyes. "I'm fine," Peggy replied, "nevertheless, thank you for showing concern." The old man nodded and suddenly let out a sharp whistle. Within a few seconds, a Labrador came running up to him, wagging its tail in a friendly manner. The dog nuzzled its nose against the old man's knees, and he smiled, patting the dog's head. "I don't want to interfere in your life," the elderly man said, "but you were sleeping in the park on a bench with a suitcase. Don't get me wrong, but it seems to me that you could use a hot shower and a cup of cocoa right now." Peggy looked at him, not understanding anything. Was he inviting her to his home or just mocking her, hinting that she needed to wash up? "Oliver and I are finishing our walk, and we invite you to visit." "Right, my boy." The Labrador barked loudly and wagged its tail, looking at Peggy with big round eyes. "Do you invite all unfamiliar people to your home early in the morning?" Peggy asked. "You're right, it does sound foolish. Let's start by getting to know each other. My name is Nicholas," he extended his hand. Peggy shook it. His hand was dry but pleasantly warm. "I'm Peggy," she introduced herself. "Nice to meet you," Nicholas smiled. "Don't worry, I'm not a threat to a young and surely fast-running girl like yourself. However, if you have someone to inform among your friends or family, you can tell them that you went to visit me." He provided an address. Peggy saved his number on her phone, pretending to send a message. In reality, she didn't know who she could message. Donna? She's at her grandmother's and thinks everything is fine with her friends. There's no need to worry her right now. "Do you like scrambled eggs with sausage and tomatoes?" Mr. Nicholas asked. Peggy felt her stomach rumble at that moment. She hadn't eaten since yesterday. Blushing and buttoning up her coat and jacket tightly, she nodded. "That's wonderful, I love it too, and even Oliver likes it, but he can't have it. Once, I wasn't paying attention, and he ate a whole skillet of omelet. Then I had to leave the windows open all day in the apartment so as not to suffocate." Upon hearing his name, the Labrador perked up its ears and looked at its owner, but realizing it was a false alarm, it ran ahead. By the way, their destination wasn't far. They approached a small, old 9-story building, and the man took out his keys. Mr. Nicholas and Oliver lived on the ground floor in a large, cozy apartment that faced the sunny side. "Come in. Have a seat. We'll wash our paws for a moment, with your permission. Let's go, Oliver." The man and the dog disappeared into the bathroom. Peggy sat on a large, comfortable sofa, took off her jacket, and surveyed the apartment. The small hallway led directly into a spacious living room, which, in addition to the sofa she was sitting on, had a coffee table, 2 armchairs, and a huge bookshelf that stretched along the entire wall, filled with books from floor to ceiling. The window and the floor beneath it were adorned with flowers. "We're done," the man entering the room said. "Would you like to take a shower or just freshen up?" Peggy nodded. "I hung a green towel for you. I'll be in the kitchen, preparing breakfast." After the shower, Peggy felt refreshed. She still couldn't believe the events of the past day. She was now alone, without a job, money, or a place to stay. She had spent the night on the street. And now, she was taking a shower in the home of a completely unfamiliar person. It felt like in one moment her old life had ended, and some other life had begun. The kitchen smelled delightful, with fried sausage, omelet, and cocoa. Mr. Nicholas stood at the stove, wearing a bright red apron over his pants. Oliver sat on the floor, staring intently at the frying pan. "Oh, you're finished. Have a seat, everything is ready." He spread the food onto plates, poured the cocoa, and placed everything on the table. "Enjoy your meal, Peggy." "And to you, Mr. Nicholas," she replied. He nodded. "And, by the way, thank you so much for allowing me to freshen up and for feeding me. Let's have breakfast," Peggy, and then we'll talk. After breakfast, Mr. Nicholas suggested moving to the living room. They settled into armchairs, and immediately a large striped cat jumped onto Peggy's lap. "Oh, you have a cat too." "She's my cat. Usually, she's not too fond of guests, but as you can see, she likes you. You can scratch her between the ears. She loves that." Peggy gently ran her fingers between the cat's ears, and it purred blissfully. "Peggy," Nicholas addressed her, "do you mind if I ask you a few questions?" Peggy nodded. The thought of having to tell a stranger about everything that had happened to her over the past few weeks made her anxious. She raised her head and saw his large, attentive, kind eyes looking at her without judgment or curiosity. She sighed and somehow managed to recount everything, starting from prom night and ending with how she ended up in the park. Mr. Nicholas listened attentively, not interrupting, occasionally asking tactful questions. "Well, Peggy," he said when she finished, "you've been through a lot." "Well, I won't waste any time. I consider myself a good person, and our meeting in the park seemed more than a coincidence to me. You needed help, and I can provide that help. You can stay with me for a while. I have a spare room." "Thank you so much, Mr. Nicholas, but I can't repay you." "Peggy, this is not just a casual invitation. I'm inviting you to stay until you find a job and can afford your own place. In the meantime, I'll ask for your help around the house. I can manage on my own, of course, but some assistance wouldn't hurt," Mr. Nicholas said. Peggy paused. She had never received help from strangers before, it had always been just her and her mother against the world. The first time she received help was from her friend's parents. And now, a complete stranger was offering her accommodation. Could it really be true? "Mr. Nicholas, I will do my best to find a job as quickly as possible," the girl promised. He smiled. "Don't rush. Come, let me show you the room instead." The room was small but very cozy. It had a bed, a bedside table, a desk, a chair, a chest of drawers, and a large bookcase filled with books. "My daughter used to live here," he said, noticing Peggy's gaze, and quickly added, "She's doing well. She's just grown up now and has been living in Greece for a few years. She has a home and a family there. She suggested that I move too, but I feel more comfortable here in our hometown. I've been living in this apartment since I was 20. We were given it when my wife and I got married. She passed away 3 years ago." They fell silent. "Make yourself at home, Peggy, and try to get some sleep. I'll take a nap too. We old folks don't sleep well at night but wake up early. But it's nice to take a nap during the day, especially after a walk." When he left, the cat sneaked into the new room, jumped onto the bed, and stretched out on the blanket. Peggy also lay down and slept for a couple of hours. Upon waking up, she messaged Donna, telling her about the housing situation and giving the new address. She decided not to mention the night spent in the park. A response from her friend came right away. "What a horror. They are monsters. What kind of apartment did you rent? From whom? Do you have money?" "I rented it from an elderly professor. And it's not an apartment at my disposal, just a room. This professor lives with a dog and a cat. By the way, the cat likes me, she sleeps with me. Yes, I have money. Don't worry. Although I'm planning to change my line of work and looking for suitable options. How is your vacation going?" "The vacation is great, the place is very beautiful. It seems like my brothers have gone wild at Grandma's place and don't want to come back home at all. My parents are also enjoying their time off and ask about you every day. What about the professor? Is he normal, not some pervert?" "Donna, he's really nice. I'm not sure if he's actually a professor, he just looks like one. His whole apartment is filled with books. I'm glad you're enjoying everything. Thanks for your support." After the conversation with her friend ended, Peggy sat down to search for a job. Although she was grateful for the provided accommodation, she didn't want to burden the professor, as she called him to herself, for too long. However, there weren't many options for jobs that provided accommodation. Mostly nanny positions, but they required a pedagogical education and experience working with children. Moreover, they preferred candidates over the age of 35. Okay, Peggy said a couple of hours later, addressing the sleeping cat, I'll try again tomorrow. And so a month passed. Peggy, together with the professor and Oliver, strolled in the park. They went to the supermarket, cooked meals, and gradually sorted through the books. I don't need so many books, Mr. Nicholas said, I want to donate some of them to the library. If you want to read something, feel free to take it. It was a good and peaceful time. It seemed like Peggy had known the professor, the Labrador, and the cat for many years. The sharp pain in her chest from her mother's death dulled slightly, and her soul felt a little lighter. Peggy took a part-time job at a nearby vegetable store, only working 4 hours a day. The pay was low, but she hadn't found another job yet. Don't rush, Mr. Nicholas told her. Stay with me as long as you need. He truly turned out to be a history professor, though he had retired about 5 years ago. His wife had always been a homemaker and raised their daughter, so after her death and their daughter's departure, Nicholas had to learn the art of running a household from scratch. It was even amusing, he said, pulling a pumpkin pie out of the oven. I ruined so many groceries in the beginning, it was terrible. My health isn't what it used to be, you know. I can't survive on dumplings and noodles. But no worries, with time I learned somehow. Mr. Nicholas, Peggy said. It seems like I found a good job. What are you saying? He exclaimed, clapping his hands in delight. What kind of job is it? Housekeeping. The house is located outside the city, the salary is good, and the days off are on Mondays and Tuesdays. Outside the city? What time will you have to wake up to get there on time? Peggy tightly held the cup with her hands. This was the most difficult part of the conversation for her to begin. The job comes with accommodation. They provide a separate room for the employee. So, you'll be moving out? His cheerfulness disappeared instantly. The professor stared into his cup as if he saw something interesting in it. Mr. Nicholas, Peggy cautiously took his hand, I'm very, truly, immensely grateful to you for the tremendous help you've given me, sheltering me when I had nowhere to live, feeding me, and keeping me warm. But I can't depend on you forever. You're not doing that, he replied. If you don't mind, I'll come over on my weekends and call you often. Will you really? He looked up at her. Of course, if I haven't annoyed you yet. Don't be silly, he instantly brightened up and asked in a businesslike tone, so, tell me about this house. Who does it belong to? Is there plenty of work there? Are the people normal? Peggy shrugged. I haven't seen the house yet because I communicated with the employer through an agency. It seems decent, the owners mostly live in the city and come to the house on weekends. Tomorrow I'll go there and find out everything. If they accept me, I'll start working the day after tomorrow. Mr. Nicholas sighed. Oh, Peggy. It pains me to part with you. You've become like family to me in just a month. But you're right, you need to move forward. It's not for me, it's for you. Thank you for brightening my life with your presence. Don't forget me. Write, call, and if anything happens, you can always come back here. They embraced, and Peggy felt like she had found a truly dear person in her life. The house was indeed outside the city, and quite far at that. There was no public transportation to the area, so the agent drove Peggy there in her car. The cottage settlement looked ordinary, narrow streets, houses of varying wealth. From plots where an old railway worker lived with 2 potato bushes to 3-story brick and concrete castles with tall, impenetrable fences. The house was, so to speak, in the middle of nowhere. At least, there was no visible development around it. The fence was exactly the same, 2.5 meters high, solid, made of crimson red sheet metal. However, the house itself stood out from the tasteless new buildings. It was immediately apparent that it had been built a long time ago, maybe 40 or even 60 years ago. The two-story house was made of gray stone, crowned with roofs adorned with beautiful green tiles. The house was surrounded by a garden and flower beds that appeared to be well maintained. I wonder if the gardener takes care of this garden. Or since I'm responsible for the house, will I also be overseeing the surrounding area? Although it's unlikely that one person can manage it all, even if they work around the clock. They parked at the beginning of the stone path leading to the house. Peggy got out of the car and looked around. There was a lot of space. The outlines of some other buildings could be seen beyond the trees. Well, here's a lucky little house, a whole estate, like in those French novels that Mom loved to read. Now I really want to get a job here. Do you like it here? Yes, it's very beautiful. I agree. The house was built over half a century ago, designed by a famous English architect. I'm sure nobody had a similar house before. And who was the owner? It seems he was some famous figure, either a poet, a writer, or a director. Wow, do his descendants live here now? Yes, some distant relatives. Well, let them tell you everything themselves. Remember what we talked about? Peggy nodded. For people like them, the most important thing is for the maid to be unnoticeable and not ask unnecessary questions. Exactly. And don't worry about how and what to clean, they have a whole staff of servants, they'll show you everything. The interview was conducted with a woman whom Peggy mentally dubbed the house manager. She also requested to be called the house manager. How old are you? The house manager asked, flipping through Peggy's resume. I'm 18, Peggy answered quietly. The girl examined the house manager. She looked exactly as one would imagine a woman who organizes the work of a large, wealthy house, tall, dry, with black hair perfectly styled into a strict bun, wearing an elegant gray business suit and classic shoes. The only lively aspect of this exemplary statue were her eyes, green with golden veins. Enlarged by black-framed glasses, they attentively studied the sheet of paper, deciding based on the description whether Peggy was worthy of mopping floors and changing bedsheets in this house. Do you have any relatives? The house manager asked. No, my mother recently passed away, and I don't have any other relatives, Peggy replied. In the house manager's eyes, something human seemed to flicker. I'm sorry for your loss. You know that the job requires living on the premises of the house, right? You can go to the city on weekends, Monday and Tuesday. Peggy nodded. Excellent, you're suitable for us, the house manager said. Peggy raised her head in surprise. You're hiring me? Yes, what's so surprising about that? I don't know, I thought there would be some background checks or something. What kind? The house manager raised a neatly arched black eyebrow mockingly. I'll make you mop the floors, something like that. Peggy, congratulations on your new job, the agent interjected. I'll bring your belongings from the car. No need, said the house manager. Billy will take care of it. She pressed a button, and a tall young man entered the room. Billy, please bring the belongings. He nodded and left with the female agent. Peggy was left alone with the house manager. Let me show you the house, she said. During their walk to the house manager's office, Peggy was too nervous to take in her surroundings. Now, the house manager led her to the front door. From here, you can see the entire house, she said. They stood facing a wide staircase adorned with a luxurious green carpet. In general, the layout is straightforward. To the left of the staircase are my office and other staff rooms, including your room. To the right are the dining room, kitchen, and utility rooms like the laundry. The rest is housed in a separate building. On the second floor are the master's offices and bedrooms. Besides me and you, are there other workers here? Peggy asked. Of course. Billy is one of the security guards. There are 6 of them in total, working in pairs. We also have 2 chefs, a gardener, and a few more staff members. The staff isn't very large, but we manage. There's not much work here on weekdays, the family mainly gathers on weekends. What about the family we're working for? Peggy inquired. Well, to put it briefly, the house belonged to the late grandfather, a renowned composer. He passed away about 10 years ago. He had a son who also passed away shortly before him. So young? Peggy exclaimed. I'm not exactly sure what happened. It seems to have been an accident. Anyway, the current residents of the house are his wife, Alice, her son Tyler, and her daughter Jennifer. Alice has her own beauty salon. She leaves early in the morning and returns in the evening. Tyler is studying at the university, and Jennifer is in the 10th grade. I see. What are they like? The house manager shrugged. They're ordinary, they don't pay much attention to the staff. Just be cautious, especially around Tyler. He has some quirks. But in any case, you'll rarely see them. Despite the large size of the house, Peggy quickly adapted and managed to keep up with everything. Perhaps her early habit of hard work and experience in the food service industry played a role. There, she had to move quickly all day. Here, there were many assistants, and the house was equipped with modern appliances. There were washing machines in the laundry room, a dishwasher in the kitchen, and several robot vacuum cleaners and a window washing machine. In general, Peggy simply supervised their work, which came easily to her due to her organization and neatness. The homeowners were rarely seen, and when they were, they paid no more attention to Peggy than they did to the furniture. It seemed like they were vacationing somewhere for most of the summer, and Peggy only started seeing them in September. Alice and her children would get up, and then the noise would start upstairs. They would go to their respective bathrooms, each of them had their own. They would dry their hair, get ready, and come downstairs for breakfast. It seemed like they didn't talk much amongst themselves. Peggy only heard Alice asking the children something, and they would respond. However, in the evenings, they returned home at different times. Jennifer, the first one to arrive, came back from school. She didn't resemble the children of wealthy parents from Peggy's school. Jennifer dressed in simple, albeit expensive, clothes and wore minimal makeup. She was the only family member who always greeted the staff. Peggy noticed that Jennifer had a good relationship with the elderly gardener. She would always stop to chat with him. Her room also confirmed that Jennifer was a good girl. It was always clean, everything was in its place, and there were many books. In the homeowner's room, there was a lot of expensive cosmetics, clothing, and various devices, of which Peggy only recognized the hairdryer and curling iron. The rest were some kind of facial cosmetic equipment, massagers, and who knows what else. The one Peggy disliked the most was Tyler. He was a typical spoiled rich kid. He was 21 years old. It seemed like he was studying at the university, but Peggy doubted that he ever attended. He often came home drunk or didn't come home at all. His room was always a mess. No matter how much cleaning was done there, it only got worse every time. He wasn't always like that, Kathy sighed. Kathy, who worked as a chef, and Peggy were sitting down for tea during the day. I've been working in this family for about 15 years. I started when the late son of the owner began living with Alice. Tyler used to be such a sweet boy, a little angel, huge blue eyes, light hair, running around the whole house, laughing. He was just losing his baby teeth back then. He laughed out loud, but every other tooth was missing in his mouth. Mrs. Kathy took a sip of tea and smiled. Peggy remembered Tyler. Yesterday, she was dusting under the couch in the living room, where the robot vacuum couldn't reach. When she looked around, she saw Tyler. Apparently, he had been watching her for a while. His carnivorous gaze made Peggy uncomfortable. However, realizing that he had been caught, he quickly left without saying a word. A few years ago, Kathy continued, something changed in that boy. It was like he was replaced. By then, both Fred and the homeowner had passed away. It seems like Tyler entered a transitional period, and there wasn't enough male influence in his upbringing. Since then, he has become rude, harsh, and conflicts with his mother. Tyler isn't the son of Alice's late husband? Peggy clarified. No, Kathy began explaining the family ties. The homeowner, a renowned composer, built the house himself. He had a single son. They had him late in life, both of them were over 40, I think. The wife passed away a long time ago, I'm not sure exactly from what. The son, it seems, was a long time ago, maybe 20 years ago. He was married. That was long before I arrived, I don't know what happened to her, they probably divorced. The homeowner loved his first wife very much, he often remembered her and wanted to see her. Well, then the son married for the second time, to Alice, and Tyler is her son from her first marriage. Jennifer came along later, a few years ago. Her husband died, and following that, the homeowner couldn't bear the loss of his son, apparently. So, they have been living here together ever since. I see, Peggy said, it's like some historical novel or family saga. The chef laughed. You could say that. The longer Peggy lived here, the stranger and more interesting it became for her to observe the inhabitants. Well, they don't mistreat you, do they? Especially that Tyler, Mr. Nicholas asked when Peggy arrived at his place on another weekend. Peggy shrugged and scratched the cat sitting on her lap. I would say they don't even notice me. She decided not to mention the strange looks she had been catching from Tyler more and more frequently, so as not to worry Mr. Nicholas. And their family is strange. Jennifer, the younger daughter, still seems like a regular good girl. But Alice, the mother, is cold, distant, like an ice queen. And Tyler is just weird. Sometimes it seems like he hates absolutely everything. Mr. Nicholas sighed. Every family has its secrets. Some are harmless, while others have such skeletons in the closet that it would make your hair stand on end. Peggy suddenly burst into laughter. Sometimes I feel like I've read too many novels about castles and estates while living with you. So, I start making up things, Peggy said. The professor smiled. I wouldn't rule out that effect. Oh, I remember when I was younger, I read all sorts of books, and then I would ride the bus and try to guess who was an engineer and who was a doctor, who was married, and who had 2 dogs at home based on their hands and shoes. Peggy laughed. And how did it go? Once, I approached a man in the park and said, "You have a lovely golden chinchilla cat at home." He looked at me like I was crazy and asked where I got that from. So, I told him that I deduced it from the fur on his pants. He didn't deduce anything at that moment, stuck his fingers in his mouth, whistled, and a Labrador ran up to him. Peggy burst into laughter, and seeing her, Mr. Nicholas also started laughing, wiping away tears that had welled up in his eyes. After laughing, he added, "My girl, but seriously, be careful. Maybe you've really read too many romance novels, but even though I'm a professor, I always pay tribute to intuition. If it tells you that something is off, it's worth listening." Peggy nodded seriously. Okay, I'll be careful. On that weekend, she finally met up with her friend Donna. Donna had become more beautiful. During the summer break, she seemed to have grown a bit and acquired a tan that suited her well. Donna enjoyed her studies. She passionately talked about lectures, classmates, and professors. At some point, Peggy felt a sharp pang of jealousy towards Donna's new friends and a hint of envy towards her student life. It's okay, Peggy thought, I'll work for a year, maybe 2. During that time, I'll save money and also enroll in university. Well, tell me everything, Donna demanded. Peggy was more open with Donna, telling her about the strange attention from the homeowner's son. Peggy, maybe you don't need such a job if he's a spoiled rich boy? Who knows what he has in mind, but it's unlikely to be anything good, Donna suggested. Peggy shook her head. No, Donna, I won't quit because of sideways glances, at least not for now. They pay well. The job is easy, I have accommodation, and I'll be able to save money for the future. And Tyler hasn't done anything yet, he hasn't even tried to talk. There are plenty of other people in the house, so I doubt he'll dare to do anything. Donna frowned. I still don't like it. It's your decision, of course, but just know that if anything happens, you can come and stay with me. By the way, she took out her phone from her pocket and started searching for something, look who I have. On the screen was a photo of a small black puppy with floppy ears and big eyes. "Did you buy him?" Peggy smiled. "No, I found him. I was leaving the university after a lecture, and he was sitting under the fence, looking so miserable and dirty, with these big sad eyes. Well, I took him with me." "Wow. How did your parents react?" "Oh, they laughed, saying I made a new friend, but they didn't object." "What did you name him?" "Cerberus." Peggy looked at the little one doubtfully. "Doesn't quite match, does it?" Donna burst into laughter.
Yeah.
"You're right. But it's fun to walk him. You shout a Cerberus, and people turn around, and this little bundle comes running." Peggy laughed. "You're always like this." Everything was calm until December. Peggy had fully settled into the house and her job, which was not demanding. She had gotten to know the other workers. She even formed a small friendship with Billy, the security guard she had seen on her first day. They often had tea together and went for walks around the property a few times. It turned out there were many interesting places on the grounds. Peggy particularly liked the summer cottage, white with neat light green shutters and a green door. It was surrounded by low trees. Billy said they were apple trees, and it would be especially beautiful here in the spring. The cottage was locked, and they couldn't see inside. However, within a week, Peggy had the opportunity to see inside. One day, the housekeeper called her. "Peggy, I have a task for you. We need to tidy up the summer cottage, just in case we need extra sleeping space for guests during the New Year holidays, or if any of the children want to stay there during the festivities." "Okay, I'll do it." The housekeeper gave her the keys. "Everything you need for cleaning is there, water and electricity are connected." Mrs. Alice said that nobody has been there since the owner passed away. He died in the summer. He loved being there. Lately, the house needs to have a more, how shall I put it, modern look. She particularly asked to remove his sheet music, old books, photographs, and things like that. "There's a small storage room. You can put everything in there." "I understand," Peggy said. "I'll take care of it." The cottage was cool. Peggy figured out how to turn on the heating and lights before exploring. The cottage consisted of a large bright room, a small bedroom, a tiny kitchen, and bathrooms. It was evident that nobody had been here for a long time. Nevertheless, there was a certain coziness to it, as if it had been built and furnished with love for someone dear. It was clear that the owner of the house had lived here. In one corner, there was a piano with stacks of sheet music piled on top. In the center, there was a long bench surrounded by chairs, and several long sofas were placed along the edges of the room. Peggy imagined the old owner sitting at the instrument on summer evenings, and elegantly dressed guests gathering around on the sofas as he played beautiful melodies. She began cleaning, and even working in this cottage was pleasant, lifting her mood naturally. Having finished washing and wiping everything, Peggy remembered that the housekeeper had asked her to remove some things. She carefully packed the sheet music and took them to the storage room, then began cleaning the photographs on the shelf, inadvertently examining them. The man in an elegant suit, embracing a beautiful woman with a high hairstyle in a black and white photo, was probably the famous composer, the first owner of the house. Next to him was obviously his wife in a more recent color photograph. The same man, but older, had his arm around a young tall boy with straight chestnut hair and dimples on his cheeks. That must be Alice's late husband, his son. And in the third photo, the same son, but older, stood embracing a young, beautiful woman. She had chestnut hair, black eyes, plump lips, and a kind, attentive gaze. For some reason, Peggy thought the woman resembled her a little. Enjoying the view, a sharp voice startled her. Peggy quickly removed her hand from the photograph, and it fell to the floor. "I'm just cleaning," she replied. The housekeeper said the cottage needed to be tidied up for the holidays. Tyler nodded and continued to stare at her intently. Peggy thought that if it weren't for his stern expression and unpleasant habit of observing people from the sidelines, he could be considered handsome overall. "And it looks like you're spying," he added abruptly, giving her an unpleasant smirk. Those are old photographs. Our mother isn't in any of them. I understand, Peggy replied. These people don't resemble you much, they look nicer. She was surprised at her audacity. She hadn't given the owner's son any reason to latch onto her before, and now it seemed like he was intentionally provoking her. He burst into laughter and took a step closer. So you think I'm unpleasant? He asked, almost standing face to face with Peggy. She cautiously took a step back and felt herself backed against the wall. I didn't say that, she answered. I meant that I liked the people in the old photographs. He nodded. Yes, my grandfather was a good man, and my stepfather was a decent guy too. He paused, as if diving into a sea of memories. His face lost its usual sharp expression, and contemplation lent his blue eyes a softness and charm. Peggy even thought that if Kathy were here, she would immediately recognize that little angelic boy she used to talk about. Giving in to a sudden impulse, she asked, Do you know her? Peggy pointed to the woman next to the first owner's son. Tyler suddenly frowned, and his face hardened again. That's my stepfather's first wife. She wasn't here anymore when we arrived, he said abruptly and turned around, leaving. He's quite strange, Peggy muttered. However, at some point, she felt a sense of relief. There was something human that flickered in his eyes. Maybe Tyler wasn't as mean and unpleasant as he portrayed himself. After that incident, Peggy became interested in the history of the family she worked for. She couldn't quite explain what prompted this curiosity. Perhaps it was because nothing significant was happening in her own life. Sure, she worked, prepared for college admissions, spent weekends with Mr. Nicholas and Donna. But no matter how close Professor and Peggy's friend were, she still felt very lonely. She missed her mother. That's how she explained to herself why she wanted to delve into the past of unfamiliar people who had died many years ago. She started with the professor. Finding records of the composer who built the house turned out to be not so difficult. Although Peggy didn't understand music, she enjoyed the former owner's compositions. She found music for every mood, cheerful and lively tunes she listened to with headphones while cleaning the vast house, or slow and lyrical melodies that made her cry as she looked at the photographs with her mother. Despite the fact that the man was a renowned composer, judging by the number of awards and music he wrote, there was little information about him, especially about his personal life. Well, what a pity, Peggy thought, nowadays, it's much easier. I could probably find his complete biography and thousands of photographs in half an hour on the internet. Even less was known about the composer's son. He was only mentioned as the son of the composer and the second husband of the famous businesswoman, Mrs. Alice. There was a lot of information about her. It was mentioned somewhere that her father was the director of a major company and had an interest in the arts. Alice and Fred had been friends practically since childhood. However, their paths diverged. Alice got married to a businessman while studying at university, and Fred married his first wife. After that, there were some unclear gaps. Peggy understood that Alice's son was born in her previous marriage. Apparently, that was Tyler. But soon after, the couple divorced for no apparent reason. As for Fred and Sandra, it was even more unclear. Peggy found an old video from a popular TV show almost 20 years ago, where the hosts visited celebrities' homes. She started watching the recording. The composer, Fred, and presumably his ex-wife were there. The filming took place in a summer cottage. The composer mostly talked about how he met his late wife, interesting incidents during tours, and the construction of the house. Meanwhile, Fred sat there, smiling at his wife, and almost constantly held her hand lovingly. She was very beautiful, just like in the photographs Peggy had seen in the summer cottage, but she seemed a bit distant. Peggy turned off the video halfway, deciding that there wouldn't be anything else interesting. Overall, they seemed quite happy, but a few years later, Fred married Alice. The first wife was no longer mentioned. Apparently, they quietly divorced. But after Alice arrived, the family started appearing more frequently in the press. At first, joyful news was published about the birth of Jennifer. But a few years later, tragic events followed. First, Fred died in some accident on his way to the city. 6 months later, the composer passed away. However, no one was surprised. Doctors attributed it to his inability to cope with the death of his son, especially since he had been frequently ill since then. Alice and the children inherited the entire family fortune, including the house. Alice successfully pursued her business, and the children were growing up. It seemed she had no plans to remarry for the third time. On December 31st, all the staff were promised a day off. Kathy prepared food for several days in advance, and Peggy did a thorough cleaning. In the entire house, apart from the family members, only the security guards remained. On the eve of December 30th, as Peggy was about to leave, the security guard Billy approached her. "Happy New Year," he said, smiling. Peggy smiled back. Out of everyone in the house, she found it most pleasant and easy to talk to Billy. "Happy New Year to you too. Are you on duty tomorrow?" she asked. He nodded and then sighed strangely, as if afraid of changing his mind. He took out a small box from his pocket. "This is for you," he said, extending the box. Peggy noticed that the young man's hand was trembling slightly. She carefully took the box, untied the slightly crooked white plastic ribbon, and removed the lid. Inside was a silver chain with a pendant in the shape of a little sun. "Thank you. It's very beautiful," Peggy said, looking at Billy. "I can help you put it on," he said. Peggy took the chain out of the box and placed it in Billy's palm. He carefully circled around her, trying not to touch her chest, and placed the sun pendant in the hollow between her collarbones. Then he carefully moved her hair to the side and fastened the clasp of the chain. "It suits you very well," he said. Peggy smiled. "Thank you very much, Billy. I'm sorry I don't have a gift for you." "It's all right. It's a gift for me that you liked it. How will you be celebrating the new year?" "With my friend, her parents, and Mr. Nicholas," Peggy replied. "Wow, an interesting company," Billy said. "Yes, something like that. They are all very close to me. I'm happy for you. I'll have to stand guard, occasionally pulling out Tyler's very drunk buddies from the snow," Peggy smirked. "Where does such confidence come from?" "It happens every year. Until midnight, they stay at home, then Alice goes to some fancy club with her girlfriends, Jennifer goes to sleep. But Tyler's friends come over, and the party goes on until morning." "Wow.
Yeah.
So, you'll only arrive on January 1st? "Yes, in the evening. I'll have to clean up." "Great. I'll be finishing my shift then. Well, see you next year. Happy New Year." Before this, Peggy had always celebrated New Year's Eve alone with her mother, Evelyn. Evelyn never bought a Christmas tree because she said it hurt her to watch a dying tree that had been growing for several years. Instead, she would bring home a small spruce or fir branch 2 weeks before and put it in a jar on the table, decorating it with tinsel and small red balls. On December 31st, her mother would prepare the standard menu: baked chicken, mashed potatoes, herring under a fur coat, salad, and apple pie. She would have a bottle of champagne for herself and orange juice for Peggy. They would watch TV together, fill the glasses with champagne and juice as the clock struck midnight, write their wishes on napkins, set them on fire, drop the ashes into the glasses, and then drink them in one gulp at the 12th stroke. The festive day went perfectly. Mr. Nicholas charmed Donna and her parents. The cathedral brought a huge homemade layer cake. While they were settling in the kitchen, Donna and Peggy went to the living room to set the table, arrange the silverware, and so on. After shooing away their younger brothers, the girls started setting the table. "That's a beautiful pendant," Donna said. "Thank you," Peggy smiled. "Did the master's son give it to you? Is it from Tyler?" "No, where did you get that idea?" "I just remembered your stories about how he looks at you strangely. I've long suspected he's in love with you, and I thought he decided to confess before the new year." "Donna, you're such a storyteller. I don't know what's going on with Tyler, but he's definitely not in love with me. I haven't seen him at all in recent weeks, and it was Billy who gave me the pendant." Is that the cute security guard? Yes. Wow. Are you dating? No, we're just friends. Are you sure you're just friends with him? Peggy shrugged. At least he hasn't confessed anything to me. Anyway, why are we only talking about me? How's your personal life going? Donna snorted. I have Cerberus. This man is more than enough for me. Funny. It's true. He loves me and demands my attention. Basically, the same guy, but loyal. Also, I have my studies. They consume all my time. Well, for me, it's my job that takes up my time. Oh well, Donna summed up, no personal life. Girls, Donna's mother's voice came from the kitchen, have you set the table? Happy New Year. Billy said. Happy New Year. How's work? Billy sighed. Nothing new. They all went to bed in the morning, so I don't think they'll be getting up anytime soon. And yes, you'll have to clean up until late. Peggy laughed. Well, I wish you a good rest, and I'm off to clear the mountains of rich trash. Probably like a whole Klondike. The house was indeed a complete mess. Trying to be as quiet as possible, Peggy began cleaning up. She was glad that she hardly drank yesterday and went to bed early. Now she could put on her headphones, play the Christmas album by the homeowner composer, and combine pleasure with work. The album was wonderful. Peggy felt as if she were at a fairy ball, surrounded by fluttering snowflakes, dancing snow fairies, and rolling snowmen. Peggy collected dozens of scattered bottles of expensive alcohol, emptied the ashtray, and put pizza boxes and plastic containers from sushi rolls into garbage bags. I wonder why they ordered all this when the fridge is filled with food. Peggy asked Kathy. Youth, Kathy replied briefly. But that's how they do things. Home-cooked food is old-fashioned, they always have to order something. When the cleaning was done, the house looked completely different. Peggy, did you forget about the summer cottage? Kathy asked. Oh, right. Do you know if anyone's there now? Most likely not. It seems like all the guests have left, so it should be empty. That's great. Peggy walked towards the cottage. It was in the same chaotic state as the main house. It was even a bit painful to see it in such a condition. Last time, Peggy liked the cottage for its old atmosphere, simplicity, and coziness. But now it looked like some kind of bar, dive, or rented apartment. There was nothing else to do but clean it up. Peggy switched to the next album. It was called Spring Droplet. It wasn't quite appropriate, but it was lively, and cleaning with music was more enjoyable. As she tidied up the cottage, Peggy immersed herself deeply in the world of music. That's why she got startled when someone touched her shoulder from behind.
Ah!
She screamed and instinctively swung her hand, which held a wet cloth. You've completely lost it. In the next moment, Peggy realized that Tyler was standing in front of her wearing only underwear and holding his cheek, which had a red mark from the wet cloth. Yes, she hit him hard. I'm sorry, Mr. Tyler, Peggy said. I thought there was no one in the cottage. I was told that no one was staying here. She handed him a dry napkin, and he wiped his wet cheek. I wanted some alone time. It seems like the party got out of control last night, he said. I thought that's what you were aiming for, she replied. He smirked. You'll probably never have an idea of what I'm thinking. He disappeared into the bedroom. Peggy piled up the garbage bags and stored the cleaning supplies in the utility room. By the way, nice necklace, Peggy heard a voice behind her. Tyler stood in the middle of the room, already dressed. Thank you, Peggy replied. Let's go, I'll help you carry the bags, he said. Peggy was surprised. Apparently, he was being kind due to his hangover. They carried the bags together to the garbage bins, after which Tyler silently walked back to the house. In the following days, he continued to ignore her, just occasionally casting his strange gaze at her. On the other hand, Billy became more active. It seemed that he took Peggy accepting his gift as a good sign. In any case, Billy started finding reasons to talk to her more often and even suggested going for a walk in the city when they had matching days off. Peggy didn't mind. She liked Billy. He was handsome, cheerful, and polite. When they finally went out for a walk, he told her about himself, how he was born and raised in a neighboring city, and how he had been involved in boxing since childhood and had achieved some success in competitions. After high school, he moved to the capital and continued his sporting career. However, it was short-lived as he suffered a severe defeat in one of his fights. "I had a concussion and fractures in both bones of my right forearm," Billy listed cheerfully. "Wow," was all Peggy could say. "And after that, it was all over." He nodded, and Peggy saw sadness in his eyes. "The doctors said I couldn't continue boxing anymore. In general, physical activities were severely restricted. But here I am, alone in a foreign city without a job. I didn't really study anything besides boxing. I don't want to go back to my hometown because there are fewer job opportunities there than here. The salaries are also much lower, and I need to support my parents. Besides me, they have 2 younger kids growing up. So, I started thinking, where should I go and what should I do?" The boxer became a security guard. "It's somewhat stereotypical," Peggy smiled. Billy smiled too.
Yeah,
But there weren't many options. "I worked at a nightclub for 6 months. Tyler used to go there regularly. He noticed me there. I once carried him drunk in my arms all the way to a taxi. While he was absent-minded, he saw my name on my badge. He said I was a good person and invited me to guard their house, and he made me write down his phone number." "Wow. And did you call him?" Peggy asked. The guy shrugged. "Why not? I believe it's better to try and regret than not try at all." "The next day, I called him," he answered, "and he passed my number to the head of security. He hired me, and I've been working here since then." "So, Tyler doesn't seem to be such a bad person," Peggy said thoughtfully. "I don't know," Billy replied. "During all this time working here, I still haven't figured out his character. He does something nice occasionally, and then suddenly becomes wild, starts drinking alcohol, and goes to parties. Sometimes he's absent from home for weeks. He disrespects his mother and doesn't consider us as human beings at all. He's spoiled. His relationship with Alice is complicated. She's like a mother, providing for both him and Jennifer, but she doesn't restrict him much. But it's like he harbors some sort of resentment towards her. Sometimes it's very evident."
yeah,
"It's a strange family," Peggy sighed. "And you can say that again." At the end of the walk, Billy said, "Peggy, you're a really great girl. I liked you from the first moment I saw you. Of course, we don't know each other very well, but I would like to have a relationship with you." Peggy froze in place. She had suspected that this would eventually happen. It all happened very unexpectedly and quickly. Gathering her courage, she replied, "Billy, I find it interesting and enjoyable to spend time with you, and I think I like you too. I haven't dated anyone before, so I can't say for sure. But you're right, we still don't know much about each other, so I suggest we don't rush. Let's just continue getting to know each other and see how things go." "Okay, as you say," Billy replied. "I won't rush you." He smiled and gently took her hand. "May I?" "Yes," Peggy said, squeezing his fingers. During the New Year holidays, Peggy had the opportunity to get to know the youngest member of the family, Jennifer, better. Peggy had previously noticed how different she was from a typical rich family high schooler. Peggy had the chance to further confirm her opinion. Tyler went skiing with his friends. Mrs. Alice also went on vacation, somewhere warm. Only Jennifer was left at home among the family members. Peggy thought that a 16-year-old girl, left unsupervised by adults, excluding the household staff, would start throwing parties or at least invite friends over. But no one came to their house for the whole week. Jennifer woke up early, had breakfast, and spent most of the day in the living room or the library, reading a book. One day, while Peggy was cleaning the living room, she noticed a familiar title, George Sand. "Is it interesting?" she asked. Jennifer nodded and smiled. "I like reading something like that occasionally." "What kind?" Peggy asked. "Calm and predictable," the girl replied. "Just like all romantic books from that time." "Are they all calm and predictable?" "Well, in general, yes," Jennifer replied, lost in thought. "That's interesting," Peggy smiled. "My mom used to love reading French novels. I never took any from her, but I always imagined that they had some very intriguing plots, like a mix of detective and thriller." Jennifer pondered for a moment. "Well, in some ways, you're probably right. The plots can be quite intricate. What I mean is, after reading the beginning and getting to know the main characters, you can immediately tell who will end up with whom in the end. Of course, there will be some mysteries revealed and obstacles overcome throughout the story, but the ending is always good. There are no gruesome deaths, violence, or anything like that, so I like reading them occasionally. It's calming, and it feels like everything in the world is just as good and stable." "You tell it very well," Peggy said. From that point on, they started communicating more often. Jennifer curated a selection of books for Peggy from their family library. "Most of these books are novels, but not all of them. As I described, they have predictable and calm plots," Jennifer said. "But I hope you'll like them." All the books in the collection revolved around secret houses or castles where the main characters lived. Peggy was familiar with Jane Eyre, as their 9th grade teacher showed them the adaptation while they were sewing another skirt or blouse. However, Peggy hadn't encountered some of the other novels before. "It's interesting," Peggy thought. "Did Jennifer intentionally select these books? Is she investigating something herself? No, she's unlikely to know that I'm interested in mysteries. But then again, how would she know? Most likely, it's just a coincidence." She enjoyed the books, and she told Jennifer about it. "And which one did you like the most?" Jennifer asked. The book they both liked turned out to be the same. "You know, I feel like the main character in this book is similar to my mom," Peggy exclaimed. "What?" Peggy was surprised. The cold Mrs. Alice didn't associate in her mind with a shy and timid protagonist. "Well," Jennifer nervously scratched her nose. "My mom was my dad's second wife. We lived in a house that I considered a castle in my childhood, but our family history was somewhat strange." Peggy felt a lump in her throat. "What kind of history?" Seeing Jennifer's expression, she quickly added, "I'm sorry if I'm prying too much." Jennifer shook her head. "No, it's okay. Actually, I don't really know the whole story myself. My family's history is a secret. Maybe there's nothing criminal or terrifying about it, it's just that my mom doesn't talk about it." "I don't understand," Peggy admitted. Jennifer laughed. "I don't fully understand it myself. Our family has been plagued by some misfortunes. My mom had her first husband, who was Tyler's father. Everything seemed fine, but when Tyler was 2 years old, they suddenly divorced for some reason. It seems like my mom almost immediately started dating my dad. I know my dad had a first wife, and it seems like he loved her too, at least that's what my grandfather told me." "Do you remember him?" Peggy asked. "Well, somewhat. He passed away when I was 7. And not long before that, my dad also passed away." Jennifer sighed. "I'm sorry," Peggy said, "it must be hard to lose a father at such a young age." Jennifer nodded. "It seems like your mom also recently passed away," she asked. "Yes," Peggy replied. "I had a really tough time dealing with it." Jennifer took her hand and squeezed it. Peggy gratefully looked at her and returned the gesture. "I'm glad we became friends," Jennifer said. "Even though there are so many people here, I always feel so lonely." "What about friends? Why don't you invite anyone over or go on a vacation with your mom, for example?" Peggy asked. Jennifer smiled sadly. my mom won't have time for me during her vacation. And it's not exactly a vacation. You see, my mom owns a chain of beauty salons. And during her vacation, she can meet a bunch of wealthy clients, like businessmen's wives, bloggers, fitness trainers, and so on. And my mom doesn't relax at all, she spends her time interacting with them. They follow each other on social media, make joint videos, and so on. That's how my mom finds new clients and promotes her business. Wow, Peggy exclaimed. Mrs. Alice seems to do a lot for you. At that moment, Jennifer frowned. Peggy couldn't help but notice how much she resembled her brother. At least, they both had the same discontented expression. There was something they shared. She could have not worked, Jennifer said. At least not as much. My father and grandfather left her such a huge amount of money that it would last a lifetime. But she enjoys moving forward and proving to everyone that she's not just a wealthy heiress who married well and became a widow. She wants to show that she's a queen in her own right. I feel like Tyler and I are not children to her in the true sense of the word. We are probably just a necessary condition of the family contract. If the first husband wanted a child, Mom gave birth to Tyler, then the second husband also wanted a child, and I was born. Of course, she fully provides for us and takes care of us, but spending time at work is clearly more interesting to her than being with us. Jennifer fell silent and looked out the window. It was snowing heavily, and large, pristine snowflakes were slowly falling to the ground. Jennifer, don't you have any friends? Surely, you have girls you talk to at school? Peggy asked. Jennifer smiled sadly. You probably noticed that I don't look like the typical girl from wealthy parents. I don't feel comfortable in class. Girls my age are interested in boys, parties, and alcohol. But I'm interested in studying and reading books. And I'm glad I can talk to you now. After the January holidays, Alice and Tyler returned. Alice, although tanned, did not look rested. It seemed like she was truly consumed by work. But Tyler, on the other hand, looked worse. He was unshaven and swollen. He entered the kitchen where Peggy and Billy were talking. Billy held her hand and was telling a story about some competition. Peggy burst out laughing. Well, Tyler said, approaching the refrigerator and taking out a bottle of mineral water. Maybe instead of seducing our security guard, you could clean up my room? It's terribly messy. Tyler. Billy started, but he defiantly plugged in his headphones and walked away. Although Peggy knew that the room was perfectly tidy because she had thoroughly cleaned it the day before, she had to go. Smiling at Billy, she got up and went to fetch the cleaning supplies. Tyler's room was as clean as it was yesterday, except for the rumpled bed he was lying on and things scattered everywhere. It was those items that Peggy started tidying up and putting away. So, you're dating our security guard now? Tyler unexpectedly asked. His tone didn't bode well, but Peggy decided that she needed to set boundaries with him once and for all. Tyler, she said firmly, whether I'm seeing someone or not is my personal business, and it's none of your concern. He abruptly jumped off the couch and approached her closely. Peggy even caught a whiff of whiskey on his breath. So, this is how you talk. He started, trailing off without finishing the sentence, and simply left the room, slamming the door behind him. Peggy could feel herself trembling. He's truly terrible. Just recently, on January 1st, he was behaving normally, even helped with taking out the trash. Well, the important thing is not to tell Billy about this, or he'll want to confront Tyler, and they'll definitely end up fighting. Feeling slightly calmer, Peggy decided to finish cleaning. She took the dirty laundry to the washing machine and hung up the clean clothes in the wardrobe. When the suitcase on the floor became empty, she noticed a small gift box at the bottom. Following some inexplicable instinct, Peggy opened it. Inside, there was a card that fell out, saying, "Sorry, I didn't mean to scare you at the summer house. Your headphones have poor noise cancellation, and I woke up not because you were cleaning, but because I heard familiar music. I also like my grandfather's spring album. Happy New Year." Along with the card, there were miniature white headphones in the box. He wanted to give them to me? Peggy was completely confused. What was going on in Tyler's head? One moment, he looked at her like a maniac, then he helped, and then he yelled like a lunatic. And yet, he had prepared an expensive and thoughtful gift. The message in the card was very touching too. Quickly, before the room's owner returned, Peggy put everything back in its place. After thinking for a moment, she placed the gift box on the table and stored the suitcase in its designated spot. Whether she had read the note or not, he wouldn't understand, so let him wonder now. After all, maybe this would prompt him to explain himself. However, Tyler didn't rush to explain himself. On the contrary, from that day on, he seemed to actively ignore Peggy and tried not to cross paths with her. On one hand, this should have pleased her, but on the other hand, the mystery of his strange behavior was enticing, like all the secrets in this house. However, what intrigued Peggy the most was what happened to Fred's first wife. While dusting the large television in the living room, Peggy remembered that she had started watching a program about a famous composer in this house but never finished it. She found the video and started watching the show from the beginning. Once again, the composer's wife surprised her. She appeared ethereal and somewhat distant, and her husband looked at her with such tenderness. Could it be that just a couple of years later, he would divorce her and marry the cold, enterprising Alice? It was hard to believe. However, in that moment, a young girl briefly appeared on the screen for a few seconds. She simply approached from behind, placed a tray with a teapot and cups on the table, and immediately disappeared. Peggy caught a glimpse of her for a couple of seconds, but her heart raced like mad. This can't be, she thought. I just think of her too often, it must be my imagination. To convince herself, she rewound and paused the moment when the girl's face was most visible, the one who brought the tray. The image quality wasn't very good, but it was clear that the girl was dressed in a uniform almost identical to Peggy's own. Most likely, she worked in this house, and no matter how much Peggy tried to convince herself otherwise, she was firmly convinced that the girl in the freeze frame was her mother. Can coincidences like that happen? Or is she just getting carried away? Could Evelyn have worked in this house 20 years ago? Peggy didn't know who could answer this question. Essentially, everyone who could have been witnesses either died or disappeared 5 years ago under unknown circumstances. Out of the household staff, Kathy worked here the longest, for 15 years, but Peggy suspected that Evelyn was no longer working here by that time. She remembers herself, probably around the age of 4 or 5, attending kindergarten together with Donna. But it seems that before that, they were in the younger group together, which is about 1.5 or 2 years earlier. Peggy began to recall everything her mother had told her about herself and once again realized how little she knew. She didn't know where her mother was born and raised, who her parents were, and who Peggy's own father was. Now it seemed so foolish and strange that she never insisted on finding out such simple things. Peggy postponed this conversation until it was already too late, and there was no one to ask. She mustered the courage and started a conversation with Kathy. The girl showed her a photograph where Evelyn was leading Peggy to her first grade class. Sorry, hon, Kathy said, but no matter how long I've worked here, I don't remember such a girl. I think when Alice appeared in this house, she gradually replaced all the staff over the course of a couple of years. I was the first one hired, and I've been here longer than anyone else. If you want to ask someone, it would be Alice herself. Taking such a step was difficult for Peggy. Where would she start? How could she ask about the household staff from 20 years ago? It's unlikely that Alice would remember such details. And there was a high chance that when Alice appeared, Evelyn was no longer working in this house. After all, why was she so fixated on this fact? Even if Evelyn did work here for some time, what would it mean? It could just be a coincidence. Nevertheless, something stubbornly insisted within her, not giving her any peace. There was some connection here. It turned out that the only person who had definitely seen Evelyn was the composer's wife. The only problem was how to find her. That was completely unclear. Maybe she had passed away, but again, no one confirmed it, or perhaps she had gone somewhere far away after the divorce. Peggy was tangled in confusion. The only person Peggy confided in about everything was Donna. To Peggy's surprise, her friend didn't try to convince her that she was imagining things but instead provided reasoned support. It's unlikely to be a mere coincidence. There's definitely something to it. Well, even if your mom just worked in this house for a while and then quit, and even if she has no connection to the composer's family story, you'll still learn a piece of her life. Maybe they'll tell you what kind of person she was, who she was friends with, or you'll find some relatives. That's what you want, right? Of course. Peggy hoarsely replied. Even if my mom just worked in this house. After all, Peggy truly had the chance to learn something about the life of her dearest and closest person. Tyler. Donna suddenly exclaimed. Tyler can help you, can't he? How so? He's not much older than me, and he probably doesn't remember my mom. But he can find out something about that mysterious composer's wife, his grandmother. Just think about it, a lovely newlywed couple, all happy, and then they suddenly divorce, and he immediately marries another woman with a little child. It's clearly a complicated story. People discuss things like that for a long time, the neighbors, the staff. Tyler loved his grandfather, and the grandfather clearly loved his first wife. So, he might have told his adopted grandson something, maybe even kept in touch with her after the divorce from Fred. Peggy pondered. Donna's words had a rational grain, no matter how slim the chance was. Apart from Tyler, there was no one else. The question was, would he want to talk to her? He hates me, Peggy said. Even if he knows something, he'll never tell. Donna shrugged. Wait for the right opportunity. Everyone has moments when they want to talk. That's when you can ask him about everything. Peggy had to wait for almost 3 months. She thought about how to establish contact with Tyler, but nothing came to mind. He continued to avoid her and rarely showed up at home. Peggy didn't even consider approaching Alice, her icy gaze put an end to any thoughts of such a conversation. Spring arrived, and the housekeeper sent Peggy to clean the summer cottage again. Jennifer sometimes likes to read there when it's warm, the woman said. And Tyler occasionally spends the night there. Peggy opened the windows, letting the air into the room that had been unoccupied since January 1st. Birds were singing outside, and the sun shone brightly. The gardener had tidied up the area around the cottage, and it looked beautiful. Iris and tulip bulbs had been planted, ready to bloom soon. The apple trees surrounding the cottage were also starting to blossom. I'll get the keys from the housekeeper and come here in the evenings sometimes, Peggy thought. It'll be so beautiful here in spring and summer. Since the cottage was far from the main building, Peggy decided to play some music. She had seen an old cassette player here before. Figuring out how to turn it on, Peggy inserted a cassette with the spring album. She had liked it back in winter, but now it sounded especially joyful and pleasant. Peggy felt as if her worries and concerns had taken a back seat, and her life was filled with new meaning and hope that everything would be all right. Peggy always enjoyed cleaning to music, and now it held a special significance, as if wiping away the dust and dirt. She was also cleaning away all the negativity that had happened to her in the past year. Lost in the cleaning and music, she didn't immediately notice the door quietly opening. You're obsessed with this melody or something, a loud, drunken voice echoed. Peggy froze. She felt the hairs on her skin stand on end. It was Tyler. Staggering, he walked through the room and approached her. Despite it being midday, he was completely intoxicated. Peggy became genuinely frightened. What are you doing here? She desperately asked, thinking of how to distract him and quietly leave the room. He shrugged in a clumsy and awkward manner. After coming home, I decided to take a walk in the garden, get some fresh air. And then I heard the painfully familiar music coming from the direction of the cottage. I thought, who else could it be there, apart from my beloved little maid? Tyler took another step towards her. Peggy was already standing against the wall, with no way to retreat, and he blocked the entire path ahead. Should she scream? But would anyone hear? She needed to distract him somehow. Unable to think of anything better, Peggy asked, "What happened to your father's first wife?" She didn't know what she was hoping for by asking that question. But somehow it worked. Tyler's eyes widened in surprise, and his wandering gaze focused on Peggy's face. He looked astonished and frightened. "How do you know about that?" he hoarsely asked. "What do you mean?" Peggy thought. What happened to her? She repeated the question firmly, enunciating each word. "How do you know her?" "It doesn't matter," she replied. Tyler frowned. Startled, Peggy hurriedly added, "My mother worked here many years ago. She knew her." "So, where is she now?" Tyler let out a heavy sigh, took a few steps back, and sank onto the couch, gesturing for Peggy to sit as well. She sat down and looked at him expectantly. There was some inexplicable struggle reflected on Tyler's face. He seemed to want to start talking but couldn't. Finally, he asked, "Why are you asking about her?" "She knew my mother, and perhaps she can tell me what kind of person she was." "I hardly knew her," Peggy answered. "I would have been better off not knowing my own mother either," Tyler replied, adding, "She won't tell anyone anything anymore." "She's dead?" Peggy asked. "No, but she's not much of a storyteller," Tyler sighed and looked wearily at Peggy. "How will you prove that your mother worked here?" Peggy first showed a freeze frame from a TV show, then a photograph where Evelyn was leading her to the first grade. Tyler nodded approvingly, apparently considering it sufficient evidence. "Well, what a coincidence," he said. "It seems we have a lot to talk about, and the conversation will be long and complicated. At least I will finally uncover all the secrets of your family." Tyler smirked. "Be careful, Peggy, it's deep. You might fall headfirst," he warned. "But I'll tell you everything I know. Otherwise, it will surely kill me." He pressed the palms of his hands against his eyes, as if trying to squeeze something out. "Please bring me some mineral water from the house, something to eat, and aspirin from the medicine cabinet. I need to regain my composure a bit." Fortunately, no one caught Peggy on her way, so she didn't have to explain where she was going with such a collection of items. When she stepped out of the cottage, Peggy felt the urge to run away and never see Tyler again. Well, at least she wanted to tell someone, whether it was Alice, his mother, or the security personnel, that he was sitting drunk in the cottage. However, she gathered herself and realized that there might not be another chance to uncover the truth, so she went back. Tyler sat at the table, holding the photographs that Peggy had examined during her visit to the cottage. "Thank you," he said. Tyler took a sandwich and a glass of juice. When he finished his meal, took an aspirin, and drank 2 more glasses of mineral water, his eyes cleared completely. "Well, I've decided to tell you everything I know, including things about my own family," he began. "I don't know why I suddenly trust you so much, but obviously, we shouldn't spread this information to anyone. After all, these are just my versions and assumptions." Confused by the unexpected start of the conversation, Peggy silently nodded. Tyler continued, "I understand that you've already managed to find out a lot about my family. If I repeat something, please forgive me. Here's how I see the chronology of events. My stepfather and mother knew each other since childhood. While my maternal grandparents weren't artists themselves, they also moved in high circles, just like my grandfather, who was a composer. I remember my mother telling me that even as children, they were jokingly considered a match. Then their paths diverged. My mother entered university and, by her second year, she met a businessman who was 15 years older than her." "Is that your father?" Peggy asked. Tyler nodded, took a sip of water, and continued, "They got married quickly, and as you can guess, I became the reason." He bitterly smirked. "But when people have nothing in common, children won't save a marriage. My mother divorced him a couple of years later. I don't know what really happened. She told me she caught him cheating. But I think it was just a convenient opportunity for her to get rid of a husband who had become a nuisance, receive a good settlement, and start her own business. Being someone's wife didn't interest her. She wanted to do everything on her own. So, that's why she didn't remarry after my stepfather's death?" Peggy asked. "Probably," Tyler nodded. "Do you have any contact with your father?" It was strange, perhaps it was the calming atmosphere of the summer cottage or the music, but for some reason, Peggy felt completely relaxed. She felt at ease sitting with Tyler. He talked and behaved normally. What was wrong with this person? Why did he fluctuate from being repulsive and animalistic to sad and almost endearing? We tried to communicate. My father finally introduced himself to me, and we even met a few times. I guess he hoped I would become a brilliant heir. But when those hopes didn't materialize, the communication stopped, Tyler said. I'm really sorry, Peggy began, but Tyler interrupted her. Never mind him, let's not talk about him. Anyway, around the same time my mother got married for the first time, my stepfather married that woman. I don't know much about her. I know she was young and a very talented poetess, it seems. She and my grandfather wrote songs together for a movie or a play. But this woman started coming to my grandfather's house, where she met my stepfather. He immediately fell in love with her. My grandfather always described her as ethereal, airy, an extraordinary creature. I think he was in love with her too. Tyler? Peggy said, feeling embarrassed. But he was already old at that time. Yes, around 70, I suppose. So what? Creative people are like that. Maybe Sandra was just like a muse to him? I don't know. Anyway, they also got married for some time, and according to my grandfather, they had a child. That's when the first peculiarities begin. My stepfather never mentioned anything about it. And, in general, he wasn't much of a talker. I found out about it from my grandfather, who had some mental struggles in his last years, and sometimes it was impossible to distinguish between truth and his fantasies. I asked my mother about it after my stepfather's death, but she refused to talk about it, saying it was none of my business. What happened to that child? Why did this couple divorce so quickly if they loved each other so much? Peggy asked. Good questions, Peggy, Tyler said. If only I knew. My grandfather told two versions regarding the child. The first one is that the baby died suddenly. That's probably the truth. I'll explain later why. But sometimes he would mention that the child was alive, and my grandfather had to give the baby to good people to hide it from the danger that threatened the child in that house. Wow, Peggy said, now it definitely sounds like a gothic novel. Tyler chuckled, hold on, sweetheart, this is just the beginning of the story. So, it's clear that nothing is clear about the child. If my grandfather referred to his stepmother as an extraordinary person, Alice told me straight up that Fred's first wife was insane, and that's why he divorced her. I suppose the story with the child played a role here. Whether he died, was abducted, or given away to an orphanage, I don't know, but it seems that it finally broke Sandra. I have reason to believe that the woman has been in a private mental institution paid for by Alice for many years. I think it was a condition of my grandfather's will. Well, now it's even more complicated. But you said that's not all, Peggy said. Yes, well, not long after the divorce, my stepfather started dating my mother and married her just a few months later. And in the beginning, it seemed like things were going well for them. I wouldn't say he became attached to me like a real son, he wasn't rude, cruel, or anything like that. Rather, he was simply indifferent. But I always felt that he loved my mother very much. He treated me fine overall, and I was okay with it, especially since I was young and don't remember many events clearly. But I always had my grandfather. Tyler's voice softened. He looked at a photograph of his young grandfather with his wife. Despite being nobody to him, he always treated me like a real grandson. He loved me, played with me, told me different stories. Even when Jennifer, his biological granddaughter, came along, he didn't love me any less. I miss him very much. Tyler fell silent. Peggy was surprised to realize that he was nothing like the tough, cynical person she had thought he was all this time. She cautiously asked, what happened afterwards? Did something change? Yes, around the time Jennifer was born. It seems like my mother got tired of playing the sweet wife and caring homemaker, although she wasn't around much anyway. So, Jennifer turned 1, or around that age, when I started noticing that something was going on between my mother and stepfather. She became nervous, hired a bunch of nannies, and started taking Jennifer with her. For some reason, she would ask me every day if I had seen him, what he told me, and she would have arguments with him almost every day. I don't know what she accused him of behind closed doors, but it was clear that Alice was dissatisfied with something. Maybe he got involved with another woman, like your father did at one point, and it deeply hurt her? Peggy suggested. Tyler smirked. Not Fred, that's for sure. He was crazy about my mother. He constantly gave her flowers, expensive gifts, and gave her as much money for her business as she wanted, no questions asked. But she was always unsatisfied. It seems that she only needs men to validate herself or use them as a stepping stone when necessary. Peggy didn't know what to say. Now she better understood why Tyler was so angry, prickly, and resentful towards the world. Why didn't they get divorced? She asked. Because my mother came up with something better. She killed him, Tyler replied. Peggy thought she must have misheard. Of course, I have no evidence. But I have strong suspicions. I will never forgive her for that. I suspect she was also involved in my grandfather's death. Peggy felt her heart pounding furiously. I remember because it was the day before Jennifer's birthday. We were celebrating at home as a family. Everything was perfect. My mother was in a very cheerful mood all evening. We were singing songs, dancing, and at the end of the night, I heard her screaming at my stepfather in the study. I thought, how could she be such a two-faced person, pretending we were a family and then yelling at him for no reason? Anyway, the next day, for some reason, I woke up early, went to the kitchen to get some water, and I saw my stepfather there. He was getting ready to leave for work. He greeted me and asked why I was up so early. We exchanged a few sentences, and as we were heading back, he was almost out the door when my mother suddenly walked in from the street. Fred was surprised why she was up so early. She said she decided to go for a little run. She was actually dressed in sportswear, but later, much later, I thought that she didn't look wet, out of breath, or tired as one would after a jog. She looked like she had stepped out for just 5 minutes. Your stepfather died in an accident on his way to work? Peggy asked, recalling stories from someone on the staff. Tyler nodded. Yes, something happened with the brakes. And you think your mother did it? That's a possibility. She changed a lot after Fred's death, as if she had shed a heavy burden. She became calm, smiling, cheerful. She stopped nagging at me and Jennifer, left us at home without dragging us everywhere. But my grandfather couldn't bear it. He was already ill in his last years. And after his son's death, things got even worse for him. He passed away in his sleep about 6 months later. All the family's belongings went to Alice, me, and Jennifer. So, I think my mother had a hand in it. But you have no proof, Peggy said. Of course not. Otherwise, my mother would have been in prison a long time ago. Peggy nodded. That's why you have such a strange relationship. You hate her, she said. He shrugged. It would be great. She deserves it. But as much as I hate to admit it, deep down inside me, there's a glimmer of hope that I'm just a spoiled, unwanted rich kid with a sick imagination. Have you tried talking to Alice about it? Peggy asked. Tyler nodded and chuckled bitterly. I did try to find out the truth about her relationship with my father, with my stepfather, if she loved him, what really happened to everyone. But every time I attempted, she would start yelling, throwing a tantrum, screaming that it's none of my business and all that. Over time, I just distanced myself from her as far as possible, tried to forget that my mother might be a murderer, and live as if nothing happened. But as you can see, it's not working. These thoughts are killing me from within. Peggy gathered her thoughts and said what she had been thinking throughout the conversation. We can help each other. I'm sure my mother knew something about the events in this house. You can help me find out who she really is, and I'll help you gather evidence against Alice. Tyler looked at her with surprise. Didn't expect such offers from you. Not sure if it will work, but let's give it a try. Maybe I'll find some mentions of your mother in the family documents, photo albums. And I'll try to find out everything I can from nearby private clinics. Maybe we'll find a place where Sandra is being kept. Let's give it a shot, he agreed. A sense of calm left Peggy. She didn't tell Billy or Mr. Nicholas about her conversation with Tyler. As usual, she only shared her concerns with Donna. Wow. I don't even know whether to envy you or be scared for you, Donna remarked. Don't envy anything here, that's for sure, the girl said. If Tyler is right, and I'm almost 100% sure he is, then I'm living in a house with a murderer who can't be put in jail. I'm just wondering how your mother fits into all of this, Donna said thoughtfully. Clearly, she didn't leave the house for no reason. There are too many coincidences. Peggy shrugged. I don't know. Alice wasn't there at the time, I think. Maybe she knew something about that deceased or missing baby. That's why she quit to distance herself from it all. Besides, she was probably already pregnant with me.
Yeah.
And you also mentioned that Alice replaced the entire staff in the house. So, something significant must have happened after the weekend, Donna added. Peggy returned to work with Tyler. They agreed to meet in the garden to talk away from prying eyes. Peggy waited for him near the summer house. Let's go, Tyler said when he approached. The weather is nice, we should stretch our legs a bit. And it feels easier to think in the fresh air. I looked up a list of private psychiatric clinics, Peggy began. I managed to identify the ones that are nearby and have been operating for more than 15 years. There are only 3 of them. She showed the list to Tyler. He nodded in satisfaction and pointed to one of the names. Not sure, but I think I've seen this name in Alice's correspondence. She pretty much gets rid of everything, but once, she must have gotten distracted, and half of the envelope remained. It seems to be the sender. Here we have our first lead. Peggy exclaimed. Peggy noticed that they had come out into a small clearing in the middle of which stood a small bush with unusual blue flowers. What's this? She asked Tyler. This is my favorite spot, he simply replied. I used to hide here from everyone since childhood. He spread his jacket on the grass, sat down, and scooted over, making room for Peggy. She sat down next to him. Then the girl looked at the unusual bright flowers, and a vague memory seemed to stir in her mind. Does this bush bloom here every year? She asked. At least for as long as I can remember, it has always been like this. The gardener said it's some rare perennial, he explained. Peggy tremblingly took out her phone. She found a photo of her mother there, taken from both sides. Look, she said to Tyler. This is my mom, and her photo was taken in the same place. Tyler took the phone in his hands and compared the photos. Hey, it seems like she really took a picture here. But what's surprising about that if she worked in this house, he wondered. What about the inscription on the photo? What do those initials mean? Peggy asked. Interesting. And do you think you might be my stepfather's illegitimate daughter? That would explain the mystery initials. Then it turns out that my stepfather fell in love with the young poet Sandra, married her. Soon she gave birth to his child. Around the same time, he started an affair with the maid, who also got pregnant by him. After that, the maid quickly quit her job, and the child from his wife either died or something else happened. Sandra ended up in a psychiatric hospital, and Fred married a woman with a young child just a few months later. I don't understand anything, Peggy said. She looked at the bush with beautiful blue flowers once again and then turned to Tyler. I'm sorry, Tyler, but it seems like the only person who can tell us the truth is your mother. He nodded. I've been thinking about it myself, but I know it's pointless to ask her. So we'll take a different approach. Let's go. He walked off resolutely, and Peggy had no choice but to follow him. What have you come up with? She asked when they stopped near the shed with garden tools. You'll see, Tyler said, taking a strange tool that resembled a bent and split-end lever at a peculiar angle. Silently, he headed towards the house, went inside, and ascended to the second floor, moving towards Alice's room. Peggy, without uttering a word, followed him with a sense of dread, guessing what he had planned for her office bedroom. I searched everything but didn't find anything interesting, except for half of an envelope with the clinic's name. But I'm sure there's something more interesting in the safe, Tyler said. Tyler began to open the safe. Wait, Tyler. Peggy shouted. Maybe we should try talking to Alice again, or go to the police. She won't tell us anything, Tyler replied, continuing his task. And if we pressure her and she suspects something, my mother will surely destroy all the evidence. We don't have anything concrete to present to the police yet, just assumptions. But after hiding this safe, we'll likely have substantial evidence. The safe door creaked. Peggy was shocked by the unexpected turn of events, while Tyler applied more force with the tool. Soon they were examining its contents. The first thing that caught their eye was a thick stack of invoices. Yes, Tyler calmly said, flipping through the papers with trembling fingers. I thought we would find various invoices here. The oldest ones are from around 17 years ago. Here's the inscription, a private psychiatric clinic. The name matches, and there's even a patient's name. What? Why does she have the same last name as us? Peggy exclaimed in surprise. What are you doing here? A sharp, firm voice interrupted. It was Alice. Well, Peggy thought either she's going to kill us now, or worse, Tyler will accuse me. This is not the future my mother wished for me, definitely not like this. Tyler. Alice addressed her son. I thought there was nothing you could do to surprise me anymore, but this is something new. Did you run out of money again, or did you need a large sum? You could have asked me. Why did you go into the safe? I don't keep any money in there, she said, looking at Peggy and smiling in a way that sent shivers down her spine. And this time, you've decided to involve the maid as well, Alice muttered. Original. Tyler calmly and firmly stared at his mother. I know you don't keep money at home, he calmly said. And what I was looking for, I will find here. I've already found some things. Alice raised an eyebrow. And what is it? Evidence that you killed our stepfather and grandfather, he calmly said. At least, I now know where you're hiding Sandra, Fred's first wife. I wonder if you also killed their child to marry him. What nonsense are you talking? Alice shouted. You've completely lost your mind. You're delusional from all the alcohol. It's not nonsense. Peggy shouted. I'm sure, my mother knew about this and that's why she escaped from here. She worked here 18 years ago and ran away when she found out something. And we will find out everything now. Alice looked at Peggy as if seeing her for the first time. She studied her carefully, her face reflecting increasing astonishment. So it's true, she said quietly, surprised. My God, all this time I thought he was just delusional. Alice approached the leather armchair, sat down on it, and covered her face with her hands. After a few seconds, as if regaining control, she spoke with a trembling yet resolute voice. Forgive me, Tyler. I only wanted to protect you, my children. That's why I always interrupted your attempts to talk about this. But it seems I've only made things worse. No matter how much you try to hide the truth, it cannot remain secret. Alice stood up, walked to the cabinet, took out a bottle of whiskey and 3 glasses. Without asking, she poured a generous amount of the drink into all 3 glasses and pushed a glass towards both her son and Peggy. Drink, she said, it's preferable to gulp it down because it will be hard to take in sober. I'll start my story from the beginning, Alice said, downing her glass in one gulp. I remember, Tyler, you had some questions. I'll try not to leave anything out. But if you need any explanations, ask. With Fred, we knew each other since childhood. In our teenage years, he even had a crush on me for a while. At first, I liked it, but then his love started to worry me. I understood and understand perfectly well that first love is a big, intense, all-consuming feeling, but Fred's went beyond normal. He was obsessed with me, jealous of anyone I even spoke to. He wanted to be with me everywhere and anywhere. And if we were at our respective homes, he would call me and could talk for hours. At some point, I got tired of it and stopped communicating. Soon after, I got into university, and I forgot about Fred. He didn't remind me of himself either. On my second year, I met my first husband, handsome, smart, wealthy. Now I understand that I didn't like him for who he was but for what he represented. I didn't want to be with him, I wanted to be him, beautiful, rich, confident. But back then, I thought it was love. We started dating, and after it became clear that I was pregnant, we got married. Alice paused and poured herself another serving. Tyler, forgive me for what I'm about to say, but if I gathered the courage to be honest, I want to do it until the end. Tyler nodded, not looking at his mother but at the glass in front of him. Alice continued, after your birth, I quickly realized that I had made a mistake. I genuinely love you, and I'm glad you and Jennifer are in my life, but motherhood is not the main purpose of my existence, and it's not my strong suit. I think that wasn't a secret to you either. Although maybe if my first husband loved me deeply, sincerely, over time, I might have accepted the situation. But he just wanted a beautiful and smart wife for appearances, and an heir. He got what he wanted, and after that, I no longer interested him. He started to cheat on me. It didn't hurt. Even then, I knew I didn't love him, but it was still quite humiliating. We divorced. Alice took another sip. After the divorce, I started talking to your stepfather again, but we did it simply as old friends. I learned about his personal life from his words. He told me about marrying a young, very talented poetess named Sandra, who worked with your grandfather on some film. As far as I can tell, he was in love with her. She started coming to their house all the time, and under the influence of her father, my late husband fell in love with her. The girl had just turned 18 at the time. Sandra was very beautiful, and at first, she seemed to him like a heavenly being, a beautiful, talented goddess sitting in their living room and receiving his affections. Ultimately, at his father's insistence, Fred quickly proposed to Sandra, and they got married. I can't say anything about the girl's motivation and character, but I believe she hardly understood what was going on around her. A true person of art, Sandra was only interested in poetry. I think she also loved and admired your grandfather in her own way, and that's why she agreed to marry his son. Have you seen her in person? Tyler asked. I saw Sandra a couple of times at some events. She was young, beautiful, dressed unusually, and had a distant look. It felt like she didn't understand what was happening around her. Anyway, after some time, your stepfather told me that his wife was pregnant. At first, he seemed happy and talked about it all the time, but then things started to change. The girl had a difficult pregnancy, and he suffered terribly because of it. Fred didn't say it directly, but from what I understood, his wife's mental state started to deteriorate sharply during the pregnancy. Sandra no longer appeared in public, and they didn't invite anyone to their home during that time. Are you saying that she was always mentally ill? Alice shrugged. Perhaps not always, but she had a predisposition to it. At first, I would just call her strange. Anyway, Sandra had a rough time during the pregnancy, and Fred suffered unbearably because of it. Once, Fred even said to me, it would have been better if this child had never existed. I tried to calm him down, cheer him up, and told him that he would see his child and stop saying such terrible things, but he was fixated and kept saying that his ex-wife would die because of the child. But contrary to his fears, the delivery went smoothly. The young mother loved her daughter very much and took care of her. And Fred didn't like that? Tyler asked. Judging by the expression on his face, he had a thought and wanted his mother to confirm it. Yes, he complained to me that Sandra paid no attention to him, only caring about the child. He remembered how good it was when there was no child. In general, this phenomenon is not uncommon among young fathers, so I didn't pay much attention to it back then. I don't know exactly what was happening at their home during that time. Sandra still didn't go anywhere, and I only saw your grandfather a couple of times. He always looked gloomy and depressed. And in the end, everything happened when the baby was about 3 or 4 months old. Alice looked at Peggy and then quickly turned away as if catching herself doing so. What happened? Peggy asked hoarsely. First, I'll tell you what my husband told me, Alice said. And then I'll speculate. He told me that he had to go on an urgent week-long business trip abroad. Anyway, when he came back, he found out that his little daughter had died. Why did she die? Did he see the body? Tyler asked. No, Alice replied. He only saw the death certificate. Our grandfather said it was some brief childhood infection, and to avoid causing more trauma to the young mother, he decided to organize the funeral quickly. But when my husband was telling me this, I didn't see much grief in his expression. But his wife's condition weighed heavily on him. She completely lost her mind, and her presence outside the hospital became dangerous for herself. Did she try to commit suicide? Alice nodded. Yes. But let me say this, you can think whatever you want of me, but I have no involvement in her confinement to a psychiatric hospital or in our grandfather's death. I keep an eye on my late husband's first wife. I diligently pay for her stay in the psychiatric hospital and cover various medications. Sandra herself appears very calm and serene. She often even writes poems. The meaning in them is impossible to decipher, but it soothes her. She doesn't like to talk about her daughter, ex-husband, or her life before the hospital. Although, according to the doctors, she interacts with the medical staff and other patients, Alice concluded her story. So, the baby died, his mother ended up in a psychiatric hospital, and our stepfather, who passionately loved his first wife, suddenly marries you. Peggy said. Alice bit her lower lip. I understand how it sounds, but try to understand me as well. Back then, I didn't study psychology, and I didn't really understand him as a person. Fred suddenly shifted his attention towards me, as if that feeling he had for me when we were teenagers came back to him. At first, I thought Fred was just grateful that I had supported him all this time, starting from his wife's pregnancy. Then I realized that he was showering me with affection and generosity, flowers, restaurants, gifts. He confessed that marrying Sandra was a mistake, a rash decision imposed on him by his father, and that he truly loved only me and lost his mind when we stopped communicating. And now, he couldn't afford to let me slip away, Alice said, taking a sip. And you believed him? Tyler asked, did you have any feelings for him, or was it just for the money? Come on, Mom, be honest as you promised. Alice swallowed. I believed him. I was alone, with a little child in my arms, trying to develop my business, and it wasn't the easiest time. You may think that I'm an insensitive iron lady who knows no fatigue, fear, or doubt, but that's not true. The uncertainty of the future scared me. I was tired of constantly working, raising you, and being completely alone. And then a man appeared who said he loved me more than anything in the world, was ready to protect and cherish me, and he immediately said he would provide money for my business as much as needed and support me in everything. I decided it was a sign and married Fred. I thought you were quite happy in the early years, Tyler remarked. Alice nodded. That's how it was. You know, at the wedding, your grandfather approached me. He seemed to have had too much to drink, although I hadn't noticed such a habit in him before. He hugged me, kissed my cheek, and asked me to be careful with Fred, who had already become my husband officially. At that time, I didn't attach much importance to his words. She looked at her son. Do you remember the first years of life with your stepfather? How did he treat you? Alice asked. I remember, Tyler replied. He didn't notice me unless it was necessary. I mean, he would give gifts, play, but even back then, I understood that he did it to make you happy. If you weren't around, he would forget about me. He wasn't cruel or rude, he just wasn't interested in me. But he adored you. Alice nodded. At first, his attitude towards you worried me, she said. Well, then I resigned myself to the fact that there was nothing I could do if my stepfather was indifferent to his stepson, especially when your grandfather loved you so much. Anyway, yes, the first years we lived well with Fred, I had no suspicions. Every day felt like a first date. I stopped worrying about tomorrow, focused on growing my business. You also seemed perfectly happy, and gradually, if I didn't love him, I certainly felt deep tenderness, respect, and fondness for him. But everything changed abruptly with the birth. I remember I organized a family dinner to announce my pregnancy. I purposely sat in a way that I could see all of your faces. I anticipated how all my men would be thrilled. However, only you were happy. I remember your joyful childish face. Alice smiled pensively. Peggy thought that she looked nothing like the stern Mrs. Alice she had seen all these months, as if the homeowner had finally shed the mask she had worn for so many years, like it was glued to her face. I saw fear on Fred's face, intense animal fear. He looked at my belly with some kind of horror and pity, but even worse was the expression on my husband's face. It was burning with hatred and disgust. Alice continued. Grandpa was the first to realize it. He hugged me, congratulated me, and then quickly took my husband to his office and closed the doors. He said something like it's a family tradition for the elder to counsel the younger when he's about to have his own child. Of course, later I understood that he just wanted to talk to him, to convince him that nothing terrible had happened. He was afraid that your husband would be jealous of you and the baby, just like he was jealous of his previous wife? Peggy asked. Yes, Alice replied. Later, Fred's father also talked to me. He said that my husband loves me very much and that his previous marriage and the birth of his daughter had left a heavy mark on him. So, he asked me to be particularly attentive and caring towards him. I tried to do that, to some extent it helped, but I could clearly see that my husband was only interested in me, not our child. He constantly asked about my well-being. If I complained of nausea or weakness, he would immediately say that this child was having a negative effect on me. I stopped going to doctor appointments with him because he would relentlessly ask them if everything was all right with me, if the child was endangering my life and health. You know, I always thought he treated Jennifer well, better than me, at least. But then he didn't spend much time with her because of work. And now I understand that he only paid attention to her when you were around, Peggy said. Alice sighed and continued, anyway, after Jennifer was born, it became a real hell. The newborn baby required a lot of attention, and I had no energy left for my husband. And how angry he was because of that. He constantly muttered that we would be better off without that damned child. It was impossible to make him touch her. He looked at Jennifer as if she wasn't his daughter but some kind of demonic creature. I became afraid that he would do something to her. And then that fear transferred to you. Tyler, who had been sitting relaxed in his chair, suddenly straightened up. So that's why you constantly took Jennifer to work with you and hired a bunch of nannies to constantly watch over her. And that's why you interrogated me every day, asking if I had talked to your stepfather, what he said, and what he did. Alice nodded. It was the worst time of my life. I lived in constant fear for your lives, and Grandpa's behavior confirmed my suspicions. I saw that he also tried to spend all his free time with you, and when I wasn't home, he would ask his son to go somewhere so that he wouldn't be left alone with the children. I didn't have direct evidence, only assumptions and suspicions, and this uncertainty was driving me crazy. I suspect it was kept secret from me. Fred's father pleaded with his son to see a doctor, and it seems he took medication for a while. Perhaps he did it irregularly, so there were periods of calm when he was okay, with me spending time with the kids, not just with him, and there were flare-ups. Once, he seriously tried to convince me to leave you and Jennifer in the care of Grandpa and go abroad to live with him. He even showed me plane tickets. Jennifer was 2 years old at that time. That's when I started losing it and called him insane, telling him that this couldn't continue, that he should love the children instead of seeing them as some kind of mistake. So that's why you became so nervous and constantly fought with him, Tyler said thoughtfully. Why didn't you divorce him then? He started threatening me as soon as I mentioned it, Alice replied. It didn't happen right away, of course. The first time I said that maybe it would be better for us to live separately for a while, he burst into tears, literally sobbing in front of me and got down on his knees. He used every argument, saying he couldn't live a single minute without me, that his father would die without his grandchildren, that it's better for the children to be outdoors. Then he behaved calmly for a while, then had another tantrum, and he would suggest sending you to an orphanage. When I wanted to get a divorce, he threatened to kill himself. He always said that his father wouldn't survive it and wouldn't even live until the end of the week once you left. What a nightmare! Peggy exclaimed. Did you not tell Fred's father about this? Maybe he could have influenced his son? By that time, his health was already very weak. When Fred was born, he was already over 40. He smoked his whole life and only quit in his old age. Besides, he started having problems with his mind. They gradually worsened. Alice glanced at Peggy. Although it seems like those stories weren't made up after all. In any case, I couldn't expect any help from him either. That's how I lived for several years, until Jennifer's birthday. Tyler frowned, as if retrieving some unpleasant memories from his mind. I often remembered that day afterward. Everything seemed fine, you looked happy, dancing with us, singing. Grandpa was also in his right mind that day and constantly smiling. Stepfather, as usual, sat quietly, but he congratulated Jennifer, gave her a collection of writings that she had wanted for a long time. Alice nodded. That's how it was. I even thought that maybe my husband finally realized that Jennifer was growing up. You were even older. And maybe he now understood that the children needed less of my attention and that she was no longer a threat to him. Well, like any mother, I hoped that his paternal feelings would awaken towards his own child. Overall, the celebration went well. You took Grandpa to help him lie down. I think I was on the phone in the living room, it was some late work call. When I finished the call, I realized that Jennifer and my husband were gone, even though they were both here just a moment ago. I immediately had a bad feeling. I went to her bedroom, thinking maybe my husband was so sentimental that he decided to put our daughter to bed. But there was no one there either. I started to get really scared. Then suddenly the idea came to me to go to the kitchen. As I approached, I saw that the light was on and I could hear my husband's and Jennifer's voices. I felt immense relief and stopped in the corridor to listen. Jennifer said, "Daddy, please cut me one more piece of cake." He replied, "Okay, get it from the refrigerator." Then I heard the sound of children's footsteps and the opening of the refrigerator door. Then I heard some metallic clinking and realized that my husband was taking out a knife from the holder. And at that moment, some instinct made me enter the kitchen. Peggy saw Alice's face change. Previously, her cheeks had become flushed from the whiskey she had drunk, but now she sat completely pale, like a corpse. Peggy shifted her gaze to Tyler. He sat frozen, stone-faced, and didn't take his eyes off his mother. I don't know what it was, unbelievable coincidence, motherly instinct, or higher powers, guardian angels, and so on. It doesn't matter. What matters is that when I entered the kitchen, I saw Jennifer standing in front of the open refrigerator. It seemed like she was trying to get the cake out without touching the loads of other food. Alice wanted to take a sip but found that her glass was empty. Without saying a word, Tyler grabbed the bottle and poured alcohol into all 3 glasses. Alice nodded gratefully, took a sip, and continued. Fred was standing over Jennifer with a large meat knife, and from the way he held the handle and the movement of his forearm, I could see that he was about to strike, Alice said. Peggy gasped, and Tyler gripped the armrests of his chair. Peggy noticed a small tear rolling down Alice's perfectly smooth cheek from her right eye. I shouted, "Stop." He turned around, and so did Jennifer. He managed to lower the knife, and she didn't realize what her father was about to do. Alice suddenly smiled. Jennifer said, "Mommy, can I have another piece?" "It's my birthday." I was trembling with fear and couldn't say anything. Fortunately, our maid appeared in the kitchen at that moment. She brought dirty dishes from the living room. I asked her to put Jennifer to bed. She was surprised because it wasn't her duty, and I hadn't asked her to do such things before. But she smiled, took Jennifer by the hand, and they left. I took my husband to the study. I witnessed that moment, Tyler said. You yelled at him loudly and for a long time. I'll never forget it. Alice nodded. He denied everything, said I imagined it, and that he took the knife to cut the cake. It infuriated me, but I still spent the rest of the evening with him. We went to bed. He fell asleep, but I couldn't close my eyes. It felt like as soon as I fell asleep, he would go and finish what he started. What happened next? Tyler asked softly. Alice shook her head. Not what you're thinking. In the morning, I decided to go for a run. I thought maybe I would tire myself out and fall asleep. My husband had to go to work soon anyway. I changed into my sports outfit and left the house. However, there was a frost that night, and all the paths in the garden were covered in ice. It was slippery to run. I almost immediately returned home. And at that moment, I saw you and your father. You didn't do anything to tamper with his car brakes? Tyler asked. No, Alice said. I have the forensic report. I'll show it to you if you want. It's just that the road was slippery that day. Or maybe higher powers heard my prayers. Although, if my husband hadn't died that day, I might have done exactly what you suspect soon. Alice fell silent. Mom, why didn't you tell me everything right away? Tyler's voice broke the silence. Tears streamed down Alice's face. You were so little. I had to protect you and Jennifer. At that moment, Peggy spoke up. So, you have nothing to do with Fred's death? What? Alice was surprised. She turned to her son. So, you thought that about me? He shrugged. No, Alice said, I didn't kill your beloved grandfather. He had a thrombus detached in his sleep. Well, Peggy said, I guess we've figured it all out. I just didn't learn much about my own mother. It seems there's more, Tyler said. I think my mom has a theory about that. Alice nodded. Yes, Peggy, with your arrival, all the secrets of our family started to unravel. However, I have no evidence, only speculations. Peggy felt her heart race. Yes, I found a photograph taken here in the garden. Tyler and I thought that perhaps Fred is my father, and that's why my mother quit her job hastily to conceal her pregnancy. Alice sighed. I think he might indeed be your father. However, I suspect that your mother is Sandra. Peggy froze in place. Tyler chimed in. When Grandpa had moments of confusion, he would talk about how Sandra's daughter didn't die. He said he gave her to a very good woman who would take care of her. That can't be. Peggy muttered. How is it even possible? Alice shrugged. Thanks to Fred's connections, it wasn't that difficult. Moreover, as it turns out, your mother and Sandra had the same last name. I think they manipulated your birth certificate a bit, stating that you were born to the woman you believed to be your mother. Perhaps Fred had connections at the hospital, and they issued a fake birth certificate. Besides, my husband wasn't interested in the child at all. He didn't initiate any investigation about it. Why did they go to such lengths? Peggy asked. We won't know that. We can only speculate. Some secrets will remain mysteries to us. Sandra probably didn't fully understand what was happening, Tyler said. Alice nodded. I suspect that Fred knew his niece wasn't capable of understanding the danger that threatened her child. In case something happened, she wouldn't be able to protect the baby from Fred. Okay, but why would the woman I believe to be my mother agree to this? Especially considering she had an affair with your husband. I don't think it was with him. Perhaps those initials stand for Sandra. Most likely, she befriended your mother, who later did everything to save her friend's child. Of course, we'll never know the true details. A few days later, Peggy met up with her friend. Now, this is a story. Donna exclaimed, waking up sober and earning a surprised look from her pet. Yes. It's been a month already, but I still can't believe that all of this is true. It seems like your life has changed dramatically during this time. That's for sure. It seemed like your opinion of Alice and Tyler has changed significantly. It has changed for everyone, including my mother, or rather, Evelyn. I don't know what to call her now. Would you like to visit Sandra? Peggy nodded. Yes, I'm considering it, she said. But I lack the courage for it at the moment. Alice warned me about Sandra's condition. She might not even remember that she had a daughter at some point. Or maybe she won't care. Or it might upset her and trigger an episode. Donna took Peggy's hand. I'm really sorry. It's like you found a mother you lost, and yet you didn't. It's all very complicated. Of course, Evelyn will always be my mother. It's just a shame that I'll never know what she was like. I think, Donna said, she was a very kind and good person. I'm sure of it. Peggy nodded. Alice and Tyler have improved their relationship. Tyler even quit drinking and started seeing a psychologist. You know, I don't recognize either of them anymore. He has become so sweet and kind, always smiling and constantly saying that it's all thanks to me, even though he was the one who revealed most of the events to me. How does Alice treat you? Wonderfully. Peggy replied. I'm currently going through some procedures that will officially confirm that I am her husband's daughter and, consequently, entitled to his estate. I'm living with them in the house now, but no longer in the servants' quarters. And how do you like the wealthy life? Peggy shrugged. I haven't figured it out yet. I don't want anything to change in that regard. Communicating with Jennifer, my half-sister, has been a great help. Did you tell her the whole truth? Yes. Alice initially didn't want to disclose everything, especially concerning her father, but Tyler insisted. He said that years of secrets haven't brought anything good to their family. Jennifer understood everything. It turns out that even as a little girl, she saw and felt oddities in her father's behavior, but she didn't know how to interpret them. And after his death, she kept it all to herself. She says that after learning the truth, she feels much lighter. Wow. Well, it's good that everything worked out well. Peggy's expression darkened, and Donna noticed it. It seems like not everything is going well for everyone. Yes, I'm having problems with Billy. After he found out who I am, we stopped communicating as we used to. Today, I found out that he submitted a resignation letter. Did you talk to him?
Yeah.
He said he doesn't have any issues with me but feels like he can't communicate with me the way he used to. Plus, he got invited to work as a coach for the junior national team, so he's quitting. Are you very upset about it? I don't know. On one hand, he's a genuinely nice guy, and I liked him. On the other hand, I didn't have any particularly strong feelings for him. So, maybe it's for the best. And Tyler? Donna unexpectedly asked. What about Tyler? Peggy blushed. To conceal her emotions, she got off the bed where they were sitting and sat next to Cerber, gently stroking his round belly. The dog flipped onto his back, comically spreading his paws, showing how much he enjoyed the attention. The two friends sat in silence for a while. Do you like Tyler? Or did his past behavior ruin everything? Donna asked. It's a complicated question. He did behave terribly before. Of course, things are different now, and he has apologized many times for his words and actions. And the strangest thing is that I actually really like him. I can see that he likes me too. Luckily, he's not rushing me, we're just getting to know each other, Peggy replied. Well, time will tell. By the way, do you know what I remembered recently? What? Peggy smiled. Remember how we skipped class and went to the fortune teller? 2 predictions for the price of 1.
Yeah.
Her name was Bella, Peggy said. But I don't exactly remember what she predicted for us. I remember well, Donna replied. She told me that I would find a new friend, and here I have Cerber. The dog, upon hearing his name from his owner's lips, lazily opened one eye but then laid back down upon realizing there was nothing delicious in her hands. All right, Peggy chuckled. What else came true? She also said that I would go through a challenging period and have problems with my parents. And that did happen, Donna admitted. Really? I thought you had a perfect family. My mom and dad were on the verge of divorce. Although they didn't publicize it, I knew about it. Probably just me. My brothers were young and didn't understand anything. It's not nice to say, but Evelyn's death brought us together somehow. We had to inform you about it and organize the funeral and everything. Yes, I remember, Peggy said. You and your parents saved me back then. I'll never forget that. Donna shook her head. Things started getting better after the trip to Grandma's. Of course, she also said that I would face many trials, but my best friend, which is you, would help me get through them. So, I'm counting on you. Peggy laughed, sat back on the bed, and hugged her friend. Do you remember what she said about me? She asked. Donna nodded. She said that a baby version of you was passed from hand to hand. I don't know, maybe because there were so many people around you in the house. Peggy shrugged. I think there were some nannies, probably. Well, everything seems to match up, Donna concluded nonchalantly. She also mentioned seeing you as a baby in a wealthy house with a staircase covered in green carpet. Do you remember it? Peggy frowned. Yes, there really is a staircase with a green carpet there. She also said she sees a dark-haired woman sleeping on the bed next to the crib. And then she saw someone taking the baby and carrying them away. Well, said Peggy, coincidences do happen. Peggy and Tyler were driving in the car. Tyler was behind the wheel while Peggy checked the navigator on her phone. Turn left now, she said. Tyler nodded and turned on the blinker. They continued driving in silence for a while. We only have 3 kilometers straight ahead, and we'll be there, Peggy said. Her voice slightly trembled on the last word. Tyler noticed it and frowned. Peggy, we've discussed this many times, but just to make sure, are you sure? She nodded silently. At any moment, you can say, I don't want to. Then I'll turn the car around, and we'll go home. Peggy sighed. I'm scared, Tyler, I'm really scared, the girl mumbled, but I don't want to delay it anymore. I already missed once and didn't talk to Mom. It's like fate has given me a second chance. I don't want to miss it because of my own indecisiveness and cowardice. Tyler nodded. Peggy continued. I've played through all the possible scenarios in my head many times, how she could meet me. I'm prepared for any outcome. Soon they arrived at the gate. The security guard asked for their names, made a call, and then opened the gate. They parked in the visitors' parking lot and approached a large 3-story building painted in pale green. Good day. Are you on the guest list? A beautiful young woman dressed in a white and blue uniform greeted them at the entrance. Yes, Tyler replied, we had arranged a visit. The nurse nodded, asked for their documents, recorded the information, then made a phone call to confirm some details. She turned back to Peggy and Tyler. I'll escort you. Sandra is in a good mood today. Does she know about our visit? The nurse nodded. We informed her that guests would come. However, we haven't revealed who you are to her yet. We can't stop you from doing so, but we recommend just observing her condition. Peggy nodded. That's what we were planning to do, she said, glancing at Tyler. I just want to see her. The nurse nodded sympathetically. Follow me. Tyler took Peggy's hand, and they walked down the long, bright corridor. The facility didn't resemble a psychiatric hospital, it looked more like a cozy hotel or a modern retreat center. Paintings adorned the walls, and flowers stood on the floor and windowsills. Recreation rooms had tables with board games, where patients were sitting and playing. A pleasant elderly man at one of the tables contemplatively tugged his beard, pondering his move in a chess game. When he noticed Peggy's gaze, he kindly smiled. As Tyler and Peggy followed the nurse, they went up to the second floor, and a chubby tricolor cat dashed past them. The nurse explained. Interacting with animals benefits the patients. Here we are, she gently knocked on the door. Come in, a pleasant female voice replied. The girl peeked into the door. Sandra, visitors have come to see you. Yes, let them in. The nurse stepped back, allowing the visitors to enter. Peggy, holding Tyler's hand tightly, walked in first. She saw a large, bright room. There was a chair by the window, and a woman was sitting in it. Peggy immediately recognized her from the photos and videos. Sandra had changed significantly, but some features from the past remained. The same thoughtful and distant gaze that Peggy had seen in the program's videos, the same chestnut hair, full lips similar to Peggy's own, and a similar figure. Hello, Peggy said quietly, feeling her mouth dry. Hello, Tyler said and cautiously let go of Peggy's hand against the wall. The woman smiled and stood up to greet them. Hello, she extended her hand to Peggy, who shook it gently. Delicate, dry fingers. Sandra's hand trembled slightly. Please, have a seat, the woman said. Unfortunately, I don't know you, and this girl resembles me so much, as if I have come to visit myself from the past. Peggy smiled. Because I am your daughter, and you are my mother. Sandra stopped smiling and looked at Peggy seriously. What? What did you say, my dear girl? I am your daughter, and I have found you, Mom, Peggy whispered, holding back tears that were about to fall from her eyes. My daughter, my dear. Sandra carefully examined Peggy's face, and suddenly a smile reappeared on her own face. My daughter, I always knew and believed that you were alive. Oh, my God, I thank you for everything. Now I can die. I won't let you die, Mom. Peggy embraced the fragile Sandra and cried together with her. Even Tyler couldn't hold back tears at such a scene. Sometimes life takes such incredible turns, the boy whispered. There are only miracles, indeed.
An amazing story, isn't it? Thank you for listening till the end. I sincerely hope that you truly enjoyed it. Don't forget to subscribe to the channel and rate this video. See you in the comments and in new releases.